Uh, but I swear that this whole Discord thing's fucking me over. I never felt so. I've never felt so. I'm not even that confused. I'm like, it's like I know enough to get it done, but I also feel like I don't know. Like I'm not running it efficiently. It's like playing a new game. Like you know, like the genre or whatever. It's like I'm playing a new fighting game, and like I know how to play fighting games. I can do quarter circles and shit, but like I don't know any of the characters. It's like that.
Oh, for me, it's just like, I mean, at the very least with 401k, it's been like 401k isn't something that's too foreign to me. So, like, creating that was just like, I had run a small server for a couple of friends way back, like back in 2016 almost. So it was sort of like all of the role stuff and all of setting up channels, making sure that they're hidden and doing all of these other things. It's just sort of, it's second nature to a degree, but you get used to it after a while. It's just that you have to catch all the edge cases and make sure. I think Discord's gotten a little more expressive as time has gone on, so it helps to kind of, for example, not being able to see Craig in channels, like, oh, he's not in the channel, so he's not going to be able to see what's being posted.
Yeah,
like that's helpful. It gives you a visual indication.
Like you program and stuff, right? So it's like, is it like categories and variables and shit? Like you have all these like separate parts you have to remember. Like, oh, this goes here and that goes there. It's like it's not really. It's not the same kind of thing. But.
It's just weird. I mean, it's just weird permissions management. Like it just sort of, to me, I don't know. I've done it, so it's I don't know how to explain it. It's just like right. once you do it a few times, it becomes pretty second nature. Just because all you really need to keep track of is who can see what, depending, like who can see what channel, and you can synchronize those rules with categories. So you can set up, like you could set up a custom category for this stuff, for the content, and then have it as only these roles can see these category, or the channels in these categories, and then you can do different sets of roles for or different sets of permissions for every single channel if you really want to. So you get a nice kind of balance of power versus simplicity. So
speaking of power versus simplicity, let me see if this announcement thing works. Everyone, sure. Hi.
There we go.
Okay, try typing in the announcement channel.
I cannot.
Okay, good. That means it works. Let's go. All right. So yeah, I'm trying to learn this thing. It's something new.
Well, I think the big problem is that like with I think the thing where I get tripped up occasionally, and I think where everyone gets tripped up, is that when you get the interface for doing individual channels, and it's like the comparative, like everyone can do this, and then everybody a step up from that can either read or not read or unchanged, and you kind of have to mentally do it in your head, like, okay, everybody can do this, so for this role I have to enable this, and for this role I have to disable this, and for everyone I want to enable this but disable this, and it just sort of becomes like you accidentally leave one thing on, and I can delete Astro's messages in chat.
Oh yeah, that's kind of fucked up. If you
I can still do that, because I don't think there's actually any other way around that, because it's
you're a mod or you're admin.
I can manage messages,
so it means it doesn't matter whose messages; it's just their messages.
The only thing I can't do is ban most people at my level, so I can't ban any mods.
I have to give myself admin. That's fucked up. I have to go out of my way to. Actually, if I'm the only person that has that role, then.
Oh no! Wait, I can ban other mods. I just can't ban them. I can't. I can ban sleep. I can't ban Patreon. I can ban Kav. I can't ban Frick. So Frick is higher than me.
Frick is higher than you. Wait, is Frick
I can't ban Xylo. I can ban Vivi. I can't ban Echo. So yes, that's the pecking order as it stands. I can't ban other people's roles. They might be able to ban me, but I don't know.
Let me see. Would people who like, I guess the Cool Peeps channel would be like literally like you and then whoever else. I should invite On here. That'd be cool to have him.
Yeah.
I don't know. Right now, it's definitely gonna be private when I work out the fucking, awful kinks and shit. Because I don't know. Like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Well, yeah, and if you ever need any help, you can reach out, and I'll be happy to do whatever I can to help.
Yeah, see, you have a good thing of it though, because it's like, oh, I just sent him a thing, because you have at least like your thing of this server. Oh, yeah, I joined instantly, like literally. I should give him the role too. There, just in case he wants to join or whatever.
Wait, where did you send it?
Poggies. Gab. Mahjong. I need to add. Doesn't matter. Anyway.
Oh, Mahjong.
I don't know why I had the Mahjong.
Learning Mahjong is actually like genuinely interesting too. Like because I got the 50-something games pack for Switch.
The one with one that came on with chess.
Yeah. Well, the one that is chess and Mahjong and Gomoku and a few other things. Like it's quite a high quality. If you like those types of games, which I'm a sucker for them, it's a really good games pack. But it allows you to learn Mahjong and specifically Japanese iiko Mahjong, and it's unbelievably stupid complex, but I love it because it's just like it's one of those games that you have to invest a bunch of time in to do anything, but once you do, you're like, I feel like a wizard now. Like I can just sit down and play this and be really bad, but like people will look and they'll be like, "How are you doing this?" And it's like, yeah, well, it's two reactions. There's one reaction which is ambivalence or pure malice, which is like, what the hell are you doing? Why the fuck are you playing Mahjong? And then there's the second response, which is, oh, how the fuck are you playing this? Like, what's like? There's either wonderment or complete malignment because
no in between.
You're either a weirdo or you're a god.
You really like. It's like if you play chess. Like people are like, oh, I don't know how to play chess, but that looks cool. It's like, you like suddenly like a nerd, like a cool kind of nerd. Like, oh, like your big brain thinking like 300 words per second or whatever. Like,
well, that's the thing. It's like I'm dumber than a bag of rocks. Like it's just you gotta learn. Like it's just as simple as like I watched a very very immensely long video on Mahjong, and I still don't know all the rules, but like I know what hands to look for and just a general like sense of what I need in order to complete a hand. So it's like with any the biggest difficulty with Mahjong really is that it uses tiles and names that we don't use in English. It's just not like for Americans, it is not an American game, and therefore we are confused. Poker is just as complex to a degree, and it has infinitely more, or it has just as many stupid hand combinations. It is just as many stupid prerequisites. It has many more styles that can be played, and different little weird things like blinds and antes and all of these other things that are completely learned by just playing it and playing it and playing it and then understanding exactly what you're looking for. Like it isn't something that you like. I remember when I first got taught Texas Hold'em, and it wasn't something that I was taught like instantly. It was something that you had to go through. You had to play through a game. You had to keep going through and be like, nope, you can't do that. You gotta follow this kind of set of steps in order to know what you're doing, and then you can kind of go from there. On a side note, I'm pretty sure I was taught Texas Hold'em when I was like 8. Which in retrospect's kind of fucked up.
It's kind of fucked up.
I you know what? I'm not complaining because it's not
I mean, it
not
works,
fun.
I guess.
It's not a fun game. It's just not something that I'd bet money on.
I mean, it's like how you learn like what's it called? Like Monopoly. You're not gonna play. You can play Monopoly as a kid, but you're not gonna go fucking buy a property. Like,
yeah. Well, and I think that's the point. Is it's like learning it that young did not instill a gambling addiction in me. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that it's probably fine. If anything, slots would have done that because I always was.
I feel you on slots.
Slots are one of those things that even as an adult who knows exactly what the odds are, I'm like, You know what? Just once, because it's like it's pure. I mean, and that's what they're designed to be. They're designed to be pure serotonin. They're like the happy machine where you just whoosh, and then you get this sensory feedback of like, oh my god, it's spitting, and it gives
This
you
happy
like this.
machine.
It gives you this moment of like euphoria, and then it's like when you lose, it's like, oh man, but the machine might be just it might be tight now, but like it soon it might be hot, and then you just yank on it again and it will just keep on going. It's self-perpetuating.
It's like I mean, I remember like Pokemon games, right? They
Yeah,
they're obviously like some of the most popular games, at least in the '90s, right?
right.
I'm really curious about how like did the effect of the actual slot machines in the game, like, did it really affect somebody like in that negative a way that like we thought it possibly could,
Well, I think that it's weird because it's such a mount like nowadays, and they did that where they removed it from. I remember when I was playing through Omega Ruby, and it was like I went to the games corner, and it was like it's been shut down, and I was like, excuse me, like you took one of the most like kind of cathartic aspects of like just sort of like admittedly one of the most frustrating aspects with like if you go back to the original either the remakes of the original or the original itself where some Pokemon were gated under having to get enough coins in order to win them. But like it just seemed very weird to me because it was like I get that it's not great to be encouraging gambling, but how many people are going to go from 9-year-olds playing Pokemon and just go completely unassailed by the concept that gambling is not good until they're 21 and able to gamble? Like, at what point does does the insanity of like it's between it's not okay to normalize gambling and it's a kid's game? I'm not exactly sure they're going to be like this is going to be normalized just because they play it in a game and it just sort of like I don't know. I think it reeks of me to the violence argument where it's like you kind of just have to rely on being a parent to sort of say this is right and this is wrong, and to a degree you have a choice as an adult to do what you want, but like up until then, like kids aren't going to be going to Vegas anyway, so what?
Yeah, the kid just drives himself to Vegas. Like,
by the time that they're an adult, what's going to be the problem? Like, I mean, by the time that they can make their own decisions and that they are able to be, told the right and wrong of what is and what isn't correct for them, like as soon as they can determine that for themselves, then why are we worrying about it? So it just seems a bit like a moot point to me. But I don't know offhand. There might be some. I'm probably missing the psychological. I'm not a psychologist, so, and I'm not a child psychologist, so.
Yeah. At worst, like
they could tell us better.
At worst, it really
First
could
guess.
not be any worse than what we see now. Honestly.
Well, that's fair.
Yeah. Because if anything, like the addiction to playing the game would be more addicting, like have an addiction than actually like the simulation of a addicting game. It's like you have this level where it's like this is a simulation of slot machines which are made to be addictive, and then you have under that it's like the baseline like actual game that you have to go through and at least have like an interest in to even get to that point. So
I think the kids are more addicted to Pokemon than they are to the Pokemon slots.
Yeah.
Which, essentially, it's like that's the it's you remove the one kind of weird, interesting catharsis and you replace it with like just a sign saying sorry, closed.
It's because that's a thing because it has like Pokemon is not like a game that's like known for its like extreme fucking gigantic amounts of, first of all, content. Second of all, yeah, it's not. Second of all, variety in its content. Because especially in the first generation, you have like nothing to do. Like it's just like RPG. It's like that's it, and you have like a little bit of variety in like terms of like the actual gameplay. But after you're done with like the main story, at least in Gen 1 in particular, you're fucking. You can battle, trade, and that's it. which is more than like a bunch of RPGs have. Like if I go in the fucking Final Fantasy 1 or whatever, and I beat the game, it's like, what am I gonna do after that? But still, it's like it's a different kind. It's like you needed that little bit of that one thing, that slot machine, to have like something to do after you beat the game.
Well, and I think even then, it's like I think they've gotten better at increasing the replay value of the game past the main story and making kind of. Although I think, to be fair, although I don't really want to take an official position on this, the whole National Dex thing was sort of a gigantic. Like, I think they could have handled the PR of it better at the very least.
Yeah.
Like, I think it was just sort of like a weird, like, it developed a lot of genuine animosity for no reason, and despite not saying anything for or against it, I think that they could have done more to address the fact that it's like there was some severe animosity towards what was essentially being seen as like kind of just an arbitrary, so we just don't want these things anymore.
Yeah.
Like, and especially with the moves was the most egregious thing to me, because I was like, this is a very weird sort of thing. I get that you're trying to kind of trim everything down a bit, but it's like when the messaging on it was quite weird when you had like the moves that you imported into Sword and Shield have like, yeah, by the way, you should forget this because they're never going to be able to learn it again. And it was like, whoa, all right, like, hold on here. Like, this is one of those things where it's like you're saying, yeah, no other game is going to have this, so you should just abandon it. Like, you're just going to waste your time.
Honestly, I think that's a little bit more egregious, honestly, because like the Pokemon, you have like, there's like a subtle kind of thing where it's like, sure, all of them are different, but they have like similar roles. It's like if you have like a Quagsire, you can use a Swampert instead. It's the same typing, different like roles, like stat wise, but you'll have the general gist of it. But if you remove moves, that's like you're removing like it's like, okay, it's like you're removing forms of attack, right? So that's basically like the basic gameplay. Even like you can make any Pokemon learn any move, and then it'd be like a massively like more open game. But if you have like, you can have like two Pokemon and they can learn any move, and it'd be like crazy. But if you have like an infinite amount of Pokemon and they can only like similar amount of moves, pretty slow amount of moves, then it'd be like a boring game,
Right. And I think that's what it is, really. It's like you look at it from this sort of, it felt very weird, especially because some of the move removals were not just like, oh, this Pokemon had a signature move that looked like this Pokemon's signature move, so they just kind of collapsed it, or they didn't do really any of the legwork that it seemed to take in order to just rip out moves from the game's set of signatures and everything. They also removed moves that were kind of just competitively viable too, which I don't have any. I'm not a competitive player. I don't have any stake in the competitive scene. But at the same time, it's like when you remove things that people see a use for and like are actually being used, and things that like make some sense to have in the game that are not just superfluous. It's kind of like, why those choices? Why make what decision? You would like to see a little more openness in a decision-making process like it, where it's sort of like, okay, we know that you have these living dexes, and we know that people are so passionate about this game that they will literally, like, they will buy every piece of merchandise humanly possible.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
Like, there are some people who this is I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say this is near to a religion to them. Like,
you're probably more than right.
They're far and few in between nowadays, but the fact of the matter is they still exist, and they are also the most loyal fans of your game. And what you are doing is you are kicking them straight in the balls, and that is just completely baffling to me, because I'm just even as someone who's fairly ambivalent about the entire thing, it seems very weird from a PR perspective that they didn't do more to sort of, having played Sword and Shield, it wasn't something that I was personally thinking about too hard. I thought it was interesting that the selection of Pokemon that were available in Sword and Shield seemed to be fairly interestingly balanced, although a bit top-heavy with Generation 5 for some unknown reason. It's like all of a sudden it was just like, wow, I've never seen any of these Pokemon before, but they don't seem like they're Galar Pokemon. They don't seem new. It's like, where are they from? Oh, black and white. That's right.
You know what? You know what? It's like okay, first of all, the thing about like the kicking the old fans in the shins, I think that's like a perfect way to describe like why everyone's pissed about this whole thing. Because it's like it's not like it seems like always controversy is like there's two types of controversy, right? There's like the instant like, you know, someone said a really shitty thing or had a really bad take and we should like oh yeah, they're fucking stupid and let's, you know, they should just be out of here. And
they cancel. And
yeah,
then...
the cancel. And then there's like the long built up one, which like this is like the most with companies, where it's like you have a company that's like, okay, they're fine, they're cool, and then like they get progressively more egregious until they do something that like fucks everyone over or like makes everyone unanimously pissed, or at least like has a large like backlash to it, and then it's like everyone looking back like what did we do to get here? Everyone's like, okay, this is like what we built up from this is where this is where this, because it's like, you know, one of my breaking points was like when they had the fucking, you know, Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire was a solid remake. Honestly, I'll defend it.
Very much so.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed it.
For a remake of a game, it did add like a lot of things. Like it just made the whole Gen 6 formula like work better. Honestly, it's make you have like the freedom of like 3D. It's like it was fun, and but the thing that broke me was like after the game, they deliberately like they had this battle island which was cool. Where you had this like it was like this square shaped island, right? Built deliberately for competitive people, and that's like a whole subgenre of like Pokemon enjoyment right there. And this is where they had an extra what's it called, daycare there. They had a few people, like a few, I think those move tutors maybe, and the battle facility, which was the Battle Maison, and that one was taken from Gen 6 directly, like wholesale, which is like okay, fine. You know, maybe have the glow resources. It's an all right remake, fine, I like it. But the thing they did that pissed me off was that they deliberately put this little model of the Battle Frontier on the top of it, as like on the top of this island. Like you could go up this you know thing and just like there's like the one area like clear everything, a few NPCs there, and it's like Battle Frontier built soon, and that's like the kind of cock tease I cannot stand, because they knew exactly what they were doing with that front to back. They knew that we wanted that shit back, and they knew that they were like they first of all they knew that they could use that as like bait, right? Because they knew like it was gone in Gen 6 and I guess Gen 5, but you know Gen 5 had a bunch of different stuff. So everyone's like, okay, the Battle Frontier might come back in the new remakes, right? It was in Emerald, they might come back. So they're like, okay, they're making people think it might come in DLC. You know, they're like their wishful minds are like confused and thinking maybe they might do DLC this one time, right? And the thing is, like, they knew exactly what we wanted, but they didn't deliver, or they just like cock tease us. That makes me mad, because it's like if you know what we want and listen to us, why not like make an attempt to actually provide it? Like you copy pasted the same battle facility from the last game into this one. You knew you could do much more with it, and that's like depth, like tease depth. Basically, it's like this cool like battle factory that you could have with your new Pokemon from with new Mega Evolutions. Like, no, you can't have that, because guess what? They're not bringing it back.
My charitable analysis of that is that they were trying to make it some cute Easter egg, and my biggest confusion with every single PR fiasco is that they don't bring in someone completely unrelated to the project who takes a look at it and says, wait, what the fuck? Wait, why are you doing that? Like, there are so many projects that could just benefit from an outside observer, because you really, this is something that they in college they always professors would always tell us, which is, if you're going to submit a paper, get a friend to proofread it. You, after working on a paper, will be blind to your mistakes. You will have read your text so many goddamn times that you have absolutely no clue where any of your mistakes are. You will become saturated with the content of your text, and not the mechanic of your text. Likewise, every single focus tested to hell project needs someone to be with complete, just absolute non-indoctrination to come in, take a look at it, and question with shrugging shoulders what the hell is going on when you make obvious statements that are going to be misinterpreted. And like something like that comes down to like even just the localization team should have been like, yo, wait a minute, like, are you guys planning a DLC? No. Why would we be planning a DLC? No reason.
Put it in there. Yeah.
And that makes me wonder, of course, what the Japanese text originally said, because of, it's a part of this is that it's it's a one-way chain, and that you have this sort of like, you have the game created in Japanese, and then a bunch of localizers come and try to make it something interesting, and of course they have failed to make it interesting really since Generation 4, when they fired the only guy who really knew how to play with the language. But it's been very weird to me to watch companies. It's very weird to me to watch companies do stupid things and then and then kind of just be like, "Oh, we're sorry," and it's like, don't even be sorry. Just what internal decision making process brought this about? Like, how does a company become so internally chaotic that their PR wing has to constantly clean up after the main company has taken a shit? Like, there's just this constant like sweep pile where they're just continually trying to sweep things under the rug and heal wounds. And I don't get it. I don't. Maybe it's just because I'm not in business, but I don't understand how a company can operate on PR debt.
That's one thing that there's like. It seems that there's like a gigantic like hole in because with the companies that like, it seems that people think like, the companies think like, there's no relation between like PR bonuses and money, right? So we can act as evil as we want to and still make a lot of money. And there's some truth of that, obviously. Like, the biggest companies are like, not the like most like morally clean and like, best. Like, we're literally getting destroyed in the art world by these fucking, greedy ass energy company, gasoline or whatever. Right. But you have these companies like CD Projekt Red, for instance, like they get cut a lot of slack, even like for their delays or whatever. Like, they had a recent one. It's like, maybe that's one too many for some people, but like they get a lot of cut of slack because they're pretty open with like everything they do. They're like, they seem, at least like, I think didn't they make Humble Bundle? Isn't that like the actual website they made? That's a side note, but anyway, they seem like they have a passion for like what they do on the, like, at the very, like, at least in the PR sense, on the outside. Like, you have these companies that like, they don't give a fuck about what you think about them, and there's also these companies that like want to be like side to side, like they do stuff that's actively hurting the customer, but they also want to have like the good PR. Like, aren't we making good games, guys? Like and subscribe, like if you like our games, it's like you can't
see EA and the Star Wars debacle when they put their foot so far directly in their mouth that they had for a while the most downvoted Reddit post of all time. Which was one of those things that you don't like to hear from anything, because it's just like, how do you manage to make such a gigantic PR disaster on a public account that you quite literally like get people to create accounts just to insult your post?
How do you fuck up that bad, basically?
I think it's interesting. Companies, and this is something that, of course, from a technological standpoint, like as a programmer, like some of the services that I use, the best services are the ones that develop postmortems when they fuck up. Like, whenever there's an engineering mistake, there will usually be a long blog post detailing exactly what led to the mistake, what the cascade was that led to the failures, and how they're going to mitigate it in the future. This is something that Discord does for all the times that I personally am not very fond of them. They have fairly good technical postmortems, as in they like to detail exactly what configuration changes led to problems, and they like to be open about about what administrative processes led to changes being set forth that led to problems. And I think that is intensely interesting, because I think that could be also applied to PR. I think PR could definitely benefit from like a post-mortem of, we have like, what are the administrative processes that lead to a post being made? Is it some guy you're subcontracting that just can make Twitter posts? Because if it is, why are you writing blank checks like that? You're writing a blank check with your company's reputation to some dude who's subcontracted, probably out of his own home. So what the hell is happening here? Like, what is your stance on, like, do you have a social media team? Is your social media team more than just a guy with your Twitter password? If it isn't, then maybe enact some basic administrative standards to be like, hey, is this tweet going to cause us financial damage? Is this tweet going to burn money?
Is it gonna like this? It's weird to think about, because like this is a new avenue for like, still, even if after like all these years of having like, you know, company Twitter accounts, it's still like a relatively like new avenue of communicating with like your customer or whatever, your potential customer, like with people in general, because you know before we're post commercial, right? We're like, or like there's like a like it's like a postmodern aspect to it. I don't know. It's like we're past the point of like linear commercials, like buy our product. It's like we're trying to it's just ridiculous. Yes,
oh, really?
I know.
I wonder how they picked that voice. Like, can you imagine recording that and just being like, now recording. All right, how much was this again? How much was this gig?
There's
Discord bot? What do you mean Discord bot?
Let me see. I guess Audacity project. You couldn't save them to Audacity project. That's interesting. All right, so it's pretty cool that we have this kind of technology though. We can just literally fucking, I could have a podcast with somebody like across the fucking ocean.
Oh yeah, it definitely. To be fair, when usually the process isn't like recorded over Discord. Usually the process is a bunch of people clap at the exact same time and then pray to God they can get it synced up in time.
Yeah,
but
yeah, I'll figure it out later. it's you know, that's the one thing I could do. You know, I could work in Ableton. You know, that's the one thing I got. Put my frequencies down. You know, increase my mids and stuff. You know, I guess. I just have to pray that this actually like works. You know, obviously we did, if we planned like to say, all right, this is where we're gonna start the podcast, right? This is the exact moment we would say like, oh, this is the fucking, what is the word for human talk podcast? We'd start like with a thing, but you know, it's just to a conversation now. I think so just want to record it at this point because, you know,
which you mean essentially that was exactly what just happened. We recorded a giant conversation about Pokemon.
Yeah, and then it just like shut off.
That would be actually pretty funny to upload, where all of a sudden in the middle of the conversation it just cuts off. Like, it's just every episode takes place that you're on a bus. We'll just put in ambient bus sounds, and you're on a bus ride, and then you get to your stop, and it slowly fades out as you walk away. You're just listening to our conversation from a seat behind us.
That's actually a good idea. We put that in there. Ambient bus sounds fade when over. I'll remember what that means. I promise. That's kind of cool though. If I like, because that would have like some kind of like setting to your podcast, you know.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting just to sort of have a thematic binder for. And if the bot just randomly leaves,
yeah, that should be thematic, all right, yeah.
Adds a bit of spice. We're constantly going to be wondering when the recording is going to shut off, and then we'll just have to stitch out the rest. Like, Craig decided he wanted to get off the bus early. He was sick of it.
he got sick. He had to say, "Oh no, we gotta
Yeah.
turn the bus around."
Wait a minute. I think corporations are people.
Oh my god. What? I mean, if he's a robot, you probably would be programmed to say corporations are people, right?
Now, to be fair, I mean, Citizens United is if okay. Let's be honest here. I don't think Craig is nearly advanced enough to have a case law dictionary, but I bet Citizens United would be pretty. Because I mean, what is next on corporate personhood if not robot personhood? If corporations can be people, abstract literal entities, why aren't robots legal entities?
That reminds me. You ever played Valhalla? That one game.
Yeah. That game is actually.
I know, right?
Like, I don't understand it either. It's one of those things where I was like, I looked at it and I was like, yeah, I'm a weeaboo. All right, so download. And then when I got into it, I was like, oh, this is much more than being a weeaboo. This is like, holy hell! Like the amount of environmental storytelling and player interaction that they programmed in is just like, you don't notice it because, for me at the very least, my inclination is not really to be experimental. My inclination is like, I want to be a good service. Like maybe it's years of retail that have slowly corrupted every single free thinking part of my brain. But like whenever I'm in a retail position, it's like, just give the customer what they want. Just don't ask questions. So you don't notice it until you get things like, and this is, I actually noticed this at first from a review of it, which was interesting enough, which is that there's one character in there, without giving too much spoilers, that has...
I don't know. If you're going to be listening to this, then you... Actually, yeah. If there's going to be listening to this, I guess they won't want to be spoiled for that, right?
Yeah, skip to just... there's something... There'll be something in the description that will say just skip. Just skip to this point if you don't want...
podcast.
If you don't... Yeah, just... spoilers. There are always spoilers.
I put spoilers for Valhalla, then we can have the conversation, as if...
Because
I haven't finished many games, but I finished
the name
Valhalla.
of the episode. Spoilers for Valhalla.
Okay, writing that down too.
There's a character in there where he asks for quote unquote frilly drinks, and then afterwards he immediately says, "Oh no, I'm a man. I want this manly drink." And it's like, if you give him the frilly drinks, you give him the drinks that he asked for first, he sort of opens up and he slowly becomes sort of more like, he realizes, he kind of becomes a little more comfortable talking to you, and you sort of get a little more out of him, and he becomes a little more honest with himself. While if you give him masculine drinks, you sort of just get the persona, and you sort of reinforce the sort of, it doesn't go nearly as far. So it's like, there are this level, and I'm baffled personally, because the amount of, as a programmer, the amount of dynamic choice programming that must have gone into it, the amount of like trying to figure out all of the different paths and the way that those must be encoded is just like, it hurts. It hurts my poor soul, because I have absolutely no clue what the just and the secret, like, there are drinks that you can create that are not on the books, and it's like, there's so much to that game. That game is really, it is a masterpiece of what it is, which is just like, you are playing, it's a visual novel, but a visual novel with bartending, which is like, it goes to show that one simple mechanic can make something that would otherwise be a linear slog become an open-ended masterpiece. Like, it just doesn't take much to go from like boring visual novel to like, and it does help that the writing is good. Like, the writing is exceptionally good. Like, that, it would be a good story in and of itself. It just wouldn't be nearly as interesting if you didn't have the extra element of like, look at this like amazing sort of simple mechanic that can drive the story in any number of directions without really having to interact with the story directly. You're interacting with it on the level of a person providing goods, and that in and of itself is just, who thought of it, and why aren't they being celebrated as someone who pioneered something extremely interesting that should have been explored? Let's see.
There's like because it's like a visual novel, like that's upgraded basically. Like it tells a story like in visual novel form, but it has like more. It's like more engaging through that drink system, right? So
developed by a Venezuelan studio.
yeah, I forgot about that. That's why they had
Games.
they had like a certain. That's why the next game's gonna be in South America, I think.
Designer Christopher Ortiz and programmer Fernando Damas. They were the two, and composer Michael Kelly. Well, all
God,
three of
Michael
you,
Kelly did a
all
good job.
y'all did well. Like
I
that.
read up
That
some of
is.
the blog posts on like the making of the game, and they had obviously have a lot of struggles when you're making a game, but it's like they kept a lot of the development like surprisingly open. Like I figured like a game like that would have like because indie games whenever it seems that whenever like a game hits you, it hits you like really hard, right? In that game, whenever I finished, I was like, God, that was like side note. That was like the first game I ever like finished on stream, like the first like story based game or whatever, right?
Yeah,
and that's like obviously that's gonna have like a little bit of like a meaning to me personally, of course. And that's yeah, go ahead.
No, you go. You were
no, go ahead because I'm gonna be here for a while, so you might as well.
No, you go ahead. I was just gonna say, it's like it's a good game to have an emotional connection to. I would say because it's like it's a good game for that.
You can really because the way I see it is like I remember like this game is Valhalla is like the game that's made for me. There's like everyone has like a game that's like you feel like whoever made this game must have been in my mind because they know exactly what I would like personally want, like verbatim, right? Like Mother 3 is like my I don't know if it was. It depends on the day. I think Valhalla might have dethroned it on some days, but Mother 3 is like my favorite game, at least past, right? And that's a game where I could say like it is like deeply emotional. Like there's a lot of and there's a lot of like no matter what you do, it has like emotions like joy, sadness, humor, like everything's like has a deep emotion to it, like a genuineness, and I respect that about the game. But also like there's like the theming, like it's more of like it's like a modern day version of an RPG, right? And that's fine, that's cool and all. But I think that the sci-fi, like Cyberpunk, is underdone still in gaming. We have like a bunch of sci-fi stories. We have God knows how many medieval stories. But Cyberpunk in particular is something that I think it's like pitifully underexplored even now. Like until Cyberpunk 2077 comes out and that makes like a new wave of Cyberpunk clones or whatever.
New delays.
Delays, yeah. I really can't wait for that game to come out because not for like the game itself, which I kind of do want to play, but I want to like influence like more people to explore Cyberpunk like ideas or whatever because that's like my favorite. I could say like every like Cyberpunk like related like thing like I enjoy. It's not like even if it's like a shitty, like even if it's probably a shitty game or whatever, like I'd probably still enjoy it because like it has like it makes my mind think about like because it's like you have this modern game, but how long will that be modern, right? But if you have a fictional future, you can explore ideas of like no matter what, like no matter how far you go past, it's still going to be like futuristic,
I'm just wondering to what degree, like with Cyberpunk, my thoughts have always been like as much as I really love it as an aesthetic, and I'm really intoxicated by what it brings to the table, which is this combination of sort of political advocacy along with like this recognition. Essentially, the to a degree nowadays, it's like the recognition that we live in a cyberpunk dystopia, but without all the cool parts.
Yep.
But that level of like the aesthetic that is typically brought about by things like if you read like Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash, which was one of those early books in that sort of canon of literature around cyberpunk, along with Neuromancer. Snow Crash was huge because it was one of the first. It as far as I remember, it coined the word avatar. Like it was the first sort of exploration of the concept of what eventually I think became MMORPGs and these sort of And this was in what 1992.
Yeah.
This was before MMORPGs were a thing. This was before, the idea of everybody being connected was more than just a pipe dream.
That was like
And then,
barely after the internet was created. Like the consumer internet was like even created. Like 2 years.
That was when the Macintosh was still fairly the original Macintosh was still very powerful. I'm pretty sure Windows 3.1 hadn't been released yet.
Yeah.
It's surreal because it was a completely different time, and it shows a completely what my conception of it is that like I'm wondering to what degree Cyberpunk will go the direction of like 1950s narratives and what the future will be. When you look at old 1950s movies of like in the distant year 2000, flying cars, portable human delivery networks operated by pneumatic tubes, like all of these different things that like people at the time saw because of the technological advances at the time, where it was like you saw the study of pneumatics when it came to like being able to deliver mail and other things all over the place, and it was like, yeah, what if we extended this to people? And nowadays we look at that and we say, oh, wait a minute, I don't want to be in no pneumatic tube. I like breathing. I like oxygen. It tends to be nice. But then we got the boring company instead.
That is like, when I think about that, like it's like you have like the futuristic fantasy and you have futuristic like realism, right? And then somewhere in the middle is like cyberpunk, I guess, because we're not going to be super futuristic fantasies. Like technology is going to make us a utopia. We'll all be like better off people. Humans will like get rid of their follies, like all that shit. And then like dystopian ideas that like, oh, everyone's gonna suffer. Big companies are gonna rule like every single big brother and type shit. And Cyberpunk is like on the dystopian side, but it shows like the thing about Valhalla in particular is that it shows like a bit of like the realism of actual. That's what I like about like a lot of like the better sci-fi narratives are like ones that obviously relate to our time, but like they're ones that have the ideas of the future. It's like I really do want to consider like the ideas like how an AI would like function in our world, like in the legal system and through like the actual like day-to-day process. It's like you have this like gigantic, like you're not the fucking Blade Runner, right? You're not Deckard going and hunting these creatures and having your emotional what's it called? Your emotional, what's the word for that? Climax or whatever. You're like a regular ass person working in this average place, and then you're living in a cyberpunk hellhole like it's just a normal day,
And you're dealing with the outcomes that result from the fact that things are not necessarily stable, and that even those, and that you end up having these sort of weird cross sympathies where it's like there's all sorts of different it disproportionately affects everybody except those at the top, and it evokes that narrative of like you kind of see it and you're not really in any position to change it, so you just kind of interact with it and you look at it and you say like, oh boy, like this is it forces you to confront it in a way that most people are forced to confront the injustice of the world as it stands, which is just like the amount of to a degree you interact with it on a level of like you do everything that is within your power, but at the end of the day you are a regular person just trying to strive for what for you're trying to strive for just some level of normalcy in a world that is not normal.
It's like an idea. It's like relatable, right? Because no matter like nothing will be like there's no such thing as normal in the first place, and like everyone's struggling for like consistency in their life. I guess that's like the kind of thing. It's like having a life you're comfortable. Like everyone wants to be comfortable in their place. Like that's like the whole point of life. I think just to be like okay with like being, I guess, in like the general sense. So that's like that transcends time. It transcends like any struggles that like no matter what other social issues, societal issues, like technology you're dealing with, no matter what like fucking company cyberpunk hellhole you're living in, you still have to deal with like how I pay rent.
Yeah, and that's the brutal reality. Is it's like, as much as you want to support causes, it's like at the end of the day, I still have to not starve, and I still have to not. There are basic levels of like there are basic levels of service work usually nowadays that the corporate machine requires, and as a result, you kind of have this weird almost everybody who works in retail who hasn't completely lost their fucking mind generally has a underlying animosity towards the company that they're working for, because everybody is totally understanding. Across the aisle, this is the understanding. The corporation does not look out for me. There are very few people who are not at the top, who would genuinely work a retail job for more than a day and think, boy, howdy, am I glad that this corporation is looking out for me? Because it's not. It's not the expectation. In fact, it is exactly the opposite expectation. The expectation is that the company is trying to take advantage of you as much as possible. And this popular consciousness of like, yes, corporations do not have your best interests at heart is so interesting to me, because despite that, people still don't look for alternatives. But why don't they look for alternatives? Because they need to still pay the bills, and there aren't things like, for example, trade jobs. There aren't things that are producing anymore. Manufacture has gone overseas, and the golden age, the quote unquote golden age of people being able to not necessarily get a college degree and just sort of go work in a factory and try their best to even as those conditions were appalling, it still gave people work that was not all service work, which is like at some point becomes the most like intellectually what do I want to say? It almost devalues your intelligence to a degree, because you have to shut off your brain. You shut off your brain, and you act like a perfectly good automaton for what can essentially be, if you act like a robot with a little more feeling, you're good. Like if you can act like a perfectly happy person all the time and have, all of your affectations be perfectly rehearsed to make the customer's experience as fluidly as possible, you are a good customer service associate according to the corporation. And that is what is kind of scary about it, is that it's like there is some level of turning off your brain that is required in order to work at those companies. And as a result, it's like there are lots of people who are completely listless, kind of just realizing that the truth of the dead-end job, the truth of like you have 10 cents more an hour now because you worked at this company for 10 years.
That, that's like, that's kind of fucked up now thinking about it, like damn, you have like, there's no loyalty really. It's like, you just like get a penance for, oh, you've been good for this long. You get a little shekel thrown more your way per week. All right, good job.
That's just what's kind of weird about it, is that like the loyalty in American companies at the very least is expected one way, and it's sort of like you're expected to be loyal to the brand and loyal to the company. Has no loyalty. The company has utilitarianism, and people who are in business constantly say this. Like whenever I would say to business majors, like, hey, like, why would a company take an employee who may not be, who's not as useful, and cut them? And it's because the corporation needs to maximize the amount that it can make against how much it's losing. And to me, that represents the ultimate race in capitalism. And I don't want to get into, I'm not advocating for any particular economic theory here, but to me, the without reform, the inevitable goal of capitalism seems to be the hyper efficiency of every corporation, of every single corporation's inevitable singularity is the super hyper efficiency of not having humans involved. And to some degree, that is exactly what capitalism was supposed to do, in addition to people being able to do whatever the hell they wanted. where UBI would happen, and then people would be able to just focus on enriching the cultural sphere and the craftsmanship of the human species, rather than having to focus on menial jobs. But instead, what has happened is that humans have been successfully used as cheap labor up until robots successfully surpass them, and then the humans that previously did it get absolutely no support. And we saw this in the manufacturing industry. We saw this in many forms of many departments of different companies slowly getting sort of replaced by algorithmic processing. You know, some people calling for the abolition of HR now for just kind of rigid algorithms that determine exactly what is supposed to happen at any given point. And then eventually the abolition of these service jobs, and people kind of left without anything. Like, it's hell now, but like, to what degree does, without UBI and without certain reforms, does it really just become a total, like, nobody has a job and nobody can afford to eat except for the people who are at the top?
After, like, because, you know, our modern form of, you know, basically everything was formed in the, you know, Industrial Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when, you know, you had like lines of people just doing one thing: pound hammer, let it go; pound hammer, let it go. And that's your entire life. So you know, at least now, like, obviously, like, there are still people who do that, but we have like a recognition that, you know, even the people who do that, like, they can be like, now they can be replaced by someone who's like more efficient, right? But you figure, like, at that point, because the issue then was, back then, was like, the human element was actually making things worse or whatever. Like, they're like a lot more, if you look, I don't know, if you look back on the like production quality of everything back then, it was like lower, because first of all, it wasn't like as technologically advanced, you know, and design decisions weren't the same. You know, we've improved like in an objective sense when it comes to engineering from the early 1900s. Like, you can drive in a car and it won't break down after like a couple like rides or whatever. You know, it can go 50 miles per hour. So it's like you have the idea that like the human element is like absolutely like not the way to go, because you have machines that can do it like in a perfect way every time until they break, which is going to be a while. Like, you know, humans have endurance and then machines don't. So the thought that you can be replaced is like, obviously that's like dehumanizing to yourself, because you just like, you know, but it's like also like humanizing in a way, because you like, you know, humans have limits, right? And we have to like account for, like, as a society, we have to like remember that it's for the betterment of our entire, like, I'm not like defending, like, you know, everybody who's like a factory worker getting thrown out to the curb or anything, but the whole like human element of it's like, you don't always have the perfect product. You don't always get like the perfect hammer. You know, you might have a mistake every once in a while, even if you're like perfect at it. And, you know, the machine, even if it's like clinical or whatever, you still get a perfect thing every time. The efficiency. So, and the you know, defending the companies a little bit there, it's like, you know, it's like the rational progression of it, right? Because, you know, it's not really their responsibility to hire people that can do this thing. It's like their hire is responsibility to, you know, get that thing done, right? And
that's the incentive. That's the incentive structure, right? Is that it's like the incentive structure is to make it so that this is just as efficient as humanly possible, and as perfect as humanly possible, and as cheap as humanly possible. Yes. And all three of those things are literally on their face. Don't hire humans, because humans are imperfect, humans are not cheap, and humans are not efficient. Humans are all three of those things to the opposite. They do not operate like a machine. So in the end, it incentivizes the corporate structure does incentivize the eventual eclipsing of humans, for better or for worse.
Yeah, and in that case, like my argument would be like, wouldn't that be like the progression of making things that are like faster, cheaper thing? That would like also make things like well, obviously the companies wouldn't want to charge less for their product. They want to make maximum profits. But let's say in a perfect world, like, you know, they charge a rational amount of money for as much as they're saving, not hiring humans, instead of just having like a bunch of robots going around, maybe doing some tune-ups every once in a while. Like you have being made incredibly fast, and you made it like incredibly cheap. So thinking about it, that would like drive down the prices for that like particular resource, and it'd be like more available to like everybody. At least like it'd have like a tangible benefit to the people who are just like, you know, on the outside, you know, who are not like hired by that. Like it would be like it's not like in sweatshops anymore. That in that case, it's like if it's just like people who are getting paid, like there's no people there. It's like people who are just like the engineers or whatever. Even though there's less people like on the floor, that means that there's like, again, that means there's less people on the floor. So that's like a good thing in the way like you don't have to worry about like human rights violations. You don't have to worry about you know, murders, fires, robbers, like, you know, all these human elements that could like hurt actual people, right? Instead of like hurting like these machines that, you know, can get replaced.
We're gonna regret that. We're gonna regret this comment, or we're gonna regret these comments in 30 years. There's gonna be AI, and we're gonna regret it immensely.
Hey, I'll get canceled by the fucking AI. I swear to you. But this is where we're at now. You know,
eventually it's gonna happen. They're going to resurrect a 30-year-old podcast, and they're gonna be like, you know what happened? You said that robots could be replaced. Can you imagine that? Fires can affect humans, and they don't affect robots. What are you talking about? And it's like, oh no. I can already see it, and I'm cringing. You know what? I'm preemptively apologizing 30 years in advance.
Yeah, there should be like some kind of like look ahead towards like there's gonna be like robots like or like not even robots. It's gonna be like AI or just like living beings that are just robotic. That cyborgs, android, whatever the fuck you call them. Which that sounds okay. Don't take me. I'm not getting worried. I'm like,
future robot overlords. Don't see this as personal.
I'll whatever you want me to call you. I'll call you robots. I promise. But if I'm not sure it's gonna be like my lifetime, thankfully, or not thankfully. That'd be cool, but like,
I mean, I gave it 30 years, so like, unless we're.
Hey, I mean, if those robots rise up, then I guess it won't be 30 years.
Well, it'll be. We will see 30 years, and then it will no longer be 30 years. It will stop at 30. It will stop at 30 years.
That'll be a fun time, then. I mean, I'm just saying that, like,
you're saying robots can replace this. You're saying robots are expendable and that they don't have emotions.
Looking back at this, I'd be like, oh my god, why did I say that shit? Like,
yeah, like,
robot lives matter, guys.
It's like, oh boy, like I was so ignorant. I'm so sorry. Like, and it probably will be that too. It's the problem is like in retrospect, all of these different things. It's like to some degree, it's like when you grow up with a certain way of thinking and a certain way of like, it's very difficult. And now and nowadays, when you say things like we should really be looking forward to 30 years when we're all going to be canceled for our anti-robot stances, it's like, boy, oh boy, can I not wait? You know, people get kind of have an animosity towards that because they see it as absurd to think that there's like going to be this this swell of popular tide where it's like all of a sudden, where we're going to be seeing, you know, these these cancellations based on all sorts of different, you know, on robots of all things, especially with like I think there was a group that was talking about like getting rights for sex robots. It was like for sex worker robots, and it was super interesting to see as like an ethical thing because this was a group of people who were genuine like these are robots who need rights because they are performing the same duties as the people who also need rights. And it was so weird because it was like it was met with a large amount of animosity of like this trivializes human rights, this trivializes, you know, this trivializes the entire idea that we should be protecting sex workers. And at the same time, though, it's like, are they the ones who are going to be in 30 years completely and utterly in the right? And we are going to be looking back on them saying, oh boy, they were suffering for something that should have happened a long time ago. It's just surreal to me.
I think we're at the point where because we're at the point where like we are like almost there, right? We're not like in the point where it's like literal Blade Runner fucking future replicants running around and hijacking ships and shit, but we're at the point where we can definitely like foresee a future where robots or all those other all those other branches are like humans, actual indistinguishable humans, and like they're citizens, like as the average one, and their AI is so complex they can respond to our every conversation like actual humans would, maybe better because they'd have like less worry about like exhaustion or whatever, right? And so we'd have to think it's like we have to think about like we actually have to think about like would there be robots need schooling? Would there be like a whole section with like would there be like a different sports section for robots? It's like the whole would there be a whole like it's like the trans rights right now. It's like would there have to be like a different kind of like we have to figure out all these like logistical issues or the logistical like things and protection
for things people didn't even really think of.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't like you go back to the 1930s and 20s, and it's like these were things that it's like most people, and it doesn't mean that trans people didn't exist, but rather that most people in their everyday lives did not encounter someone who identified that way, and as a result, their world was completely like it didn't have a contrast. It wasn't like cis versus trans. It was like there is no such thing. It's the absence of the concept, which is like to what degree when you introduce this new thing, it's very weird how nowadays we are dealing with and I think that's the main impedance mismatch is when people are first that we're kind of dealing with the first generation of like with homosexuality. We have absolutely no excuses, and just homosexuality has been around for since, well, I mean, to be fair, I guess cross-dressing and certain things, although trans rights are obviously not cross-dressing, but like the gender fluidity and the idea that there's not set gender roles and all of these different sort of things that are adjacent to trans rights and to trans advocacy are like those have been played around with since ancient times as well. So it's not something that I don't see as like out of the blue, but I also see it as different because like the people in the 1960s people I guess in the 1960s people were having the first conversations about like homosexuality should be absolutely accepted, and there were people at that time saying that there were trans people and trans people should be accepted as well. It's just that their story got kind of buried underneath a lot of popular sentiment because people weren't necessarily. It was a harder battle to fight for a lot of people, and I'm glad now that we're finally getting to that battle, and it's seeing more widespread adoption. People are willing to even people who still have trouble understanding the concept to a degree because they didn't have that concept beforehand or didn't think about that concept beforehand. Say, whatever you want, whatever you will call yourself, I will treat you that way. And I want to give you whatever you want in order to be happy. And that is even people who are not necessarily all the way on board are still making sometimes a best faith effort to do what they can to respect someone and to give. And that is very encouraging. And then on the other side, you have people who dig in their heels and make it their utmost goal to trivialize and insult the advocacy of people. It's just weird to me that it's like those category that I would describe them as almost category errors, where it's like all of a sudden you introduce this concept to somebody and their first reaction has to be one of like processing the fact that this category exists. And it's very weird to me because there are kids nowadays are essentially like going to be raised with this concept being a thing. Like we live in the last generation that's not going to see this as a thing. Like we're the last generation that was born into a world where this was not widespread, and now it is more widespread.
It's textbooks now,
Mm-hmm. And that's important. It's super important. It's super important for advocacy. It's just very weird to me that it's like we might see something. We might, and I want to be careful choosing the words here. We might see something similar in terms of any number of things might pop out of the woodwork all of a sudden and sort of become more more paid attention to, which is important. I think it's the way that culture evolves and the way that culture sort of creates it creates protections for itself in a way that is very important. We enshrine the rights of people to live the way that they want to live within reason in our sets of in our sets of sort of codified procedures for interacting with people. And as a result, it's like, what new things will pop out? Will robots, with the rise of conversational AI, will we start having to have these conversations, and to what degree will people have animosity towards it? Simply because, like, right now we're still dealing with the fact that when you get a Google Home, people see it as a microphone tied straight to a corporation inside of your room, rather than, this new-fangled AI that has some level of procedural consciousness rather than actual consciousness. But
yeah,
I don't know.
That's I think there's like a cycle, right, when it comes to like rights or human rights, because we're at the point where like you had a few like quote unquote cycles. You had rights for gay people, homosexual, the baseline LGBT, and then you have we're fighting the one with trans people, and then past that will be maybe robotic rights. Who knows? But so it really just goes like, there's like unknown, right? First of all, like unknown, like, oh, that I don't know, like what that, like, that's not is that a thing? Like, and then it's like next is like, okay, you're known of it, but like barely, it's like that one, like you might have one stereotypically gay character in a random sitcom, and like, oh, point and laugh at them because they're different or whatever.
Right, you get to the othering where it becomes recognition but othering.
Yeah,
the tribalistic response.
Yeah. And then the third part is like you have a kind of break into culture, or like break into like the actual, like, what do I call it? Like you have more like readily
sympathetic,
more
sympathetic depictions.
Yeah, you have like characters that are like just normal people who just happen to be gay.
Yeah, and that's really what I think lots of Hollywood is starving for right now, is like just normal characters who, and I think some people have done a really great job at doing that, and other people have regressed to just doing stereotypes.
Yeah,
it's very interesting to me.
And then you have finally this like acceptance that's just like a normal thing, like that's it. So
and you'll just see that it's just as like, it'll be just as common to see we don't think we're necessarily at that stage yet, but you'll see husband and wife as much as you'll see wife and husband increasingly in media. And you'll just sort of see advertisements and conservative watchdog groups will be like, degeneration of American values, and it's like, just fuck off.
But that's like, but at that point, like, they're the minority,
Well, exactly, and it's increasingly becoming that. Of course, they're now starting to feel like they're being persecuted, which is like, yes, your bad opinions are being slowly but surely choked out by rationality and sort of a general appeal to human empathy, rather than some misguided attempt to define morals back in the 1920s. It's I don't know. I'm glad that there are more sympathetic and normalized depictions than there are stereotypical depictions. And I think that's the way that we get to normalcy, is when it's just like, it becomes not about being, it goes past YMCA and becomes like, just, you can meet a normal person and they can say, yeah, I'm gay. And it's just like, oh, okay, cool. Like, it's a thing. It's just, what type of sandwich do you like? I like lettuce. Oh, lettuce is cool. Yeah. It just,
I want there to be a point where you get like a worse reaction for having a bad take about cereal than you would for being...
I mean, to be fair, some people with pineapple on pizza, they get heated.
Yeah.
They get heated about that. So I think to some degrees with some food debates, we're already on that par, but that's probably because our culture has become so absurdist that it's like the serious issues get less serious anger than fake debates about things like toilet paper rolls and
is the skirt yellow or blue?
Yeah, the black and blue or yellow and white and
whatever.
Yanny and Laurel. It's insane. We live in a culture where I think to some degree we've become so used to fighting about things that we've started just sort of popularly creating things to just like the internet is great for creating things that are just born to make people assemble into tribes and just duke it out and call other people the most vile, nasty shit for just like, you heard Laurel, so obviously you are subhuman. And it's like, whoa, man, that's really what the hell? Like, there are people who take these things so seriously, and some people who do it for the meme are like trying to be really edgy, and it's like, yo, you need to calm down. Like, this is not okay. But I wonder to what degree that's an indictment of the culture that's sort of just like, it's a battleground. It's a constant battleground. And to some degree, that battleground is warranted because, again, when it comes to fighting for people's rights and enshrining those rights in law, it's important to be adamant that these things are correct. And it doesn't mean you necessarily have to be combative all the time, but it means that you stick to your guns. You don't capitulate. You don't like there is no room for compromise when it comes to recognizing people as people. Like, that is not, we don't compromise on human rights. That's something that we're not expected to do. Nobody has ever said, nobody rational has ever said, yes, using chemical weapons is okay if you're a certain side. Like, nobody has ever said, well, there are certain conditions in which, like, no rational person, no person with anything but an investment in the war machine has ever said, like, this is okay, because it's a human right. It's enshrined as being like, this is something that we do not do to other humans. And if someone does do it, we prosecute it with literally the highest form of prejudice. Like,
people, no one's gonna be like, breaking the Geneva is okay if you're on our side, okay, guys? Like,
and that's I mean, to a degree, I think that was kind of that has always been the historical revisionism of, like, we didn't break the Geneva Convention. We just, we quietly ignored it. They broke it first, but
they did it first.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it is as childish as that, and the winners will always write the trials. The winners will always be the ones who get to take the other one to The Hague and execute the people behind it.
And that's just history at that point.
History, well, exactly,
written by the winners.
Yeah, essentially. Which is why I hope that I hope that history in this case is. I hope history sees people favorably for sticking up for people who are trans and people who are gay, and I hope that even more now than today, I hope it's seen as like that our generation never gets as jaded as the generation before us. when we examine, and I wonder what issues we'll get jaded on. Like, I wonder what issues people will have a hard time accepting in the future. Because to some degree, your beliefs become a bit codified. Your perception of things becomes a little more less malleable as you get on, as your neuroplasticity decreases. Like, you're not nearly as open to new ideas, and slowly but surely, you become a bit calcified. So what are robots going to become part of that? Are robots going to become part of our list of internal prejudices that we have internalized from our age?
From the beginning,
It's very, yeah. I was born in a world where robots were just robots.
Mm.
But that's weird, because in retrospect, what is that going to mean?
That's kind of like weird to think about, because you have that's really the thing. I think that was like the thing that it was going towards, right? That's the whole point of that game, because you have all these characters that are just like, yeah, there's cyborgs or whatever. They have, like, parts of them are human and parts of them are robotic, and then some of them are like completely robotic, and then some of them are like just born regular humans, or not regular, but humans, I guess, at that point. And this bar, even though bars like the typically defined as like the birthplace of scum and villainy, it's a pretty open bar, at least because main character Jill is pretty open with like the ideas that she has in this like crazy fucking absolutely like absurd cyberpunk world that she like resides in,
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, those are the two sort of prevailing narratives. It's like you either have the protagonist who's open towards a world that is closed, or you have a protagonist that is closed to a world that is open. And it's very weird to me that these two when you kind of classify it as those narratives as specifically narratives that have sort of on the nose depictions of rights and of decadence and of things, of what can be seen as like the two conflicting narratives of like some people who see it as like some people who see certain things as being a sign of the times, or some people who see it as like the natural progression in a crazy world of like we recognize things as being we need to enshrine certain things as being okay, and these narratives help us to sort of work through the fact that it's like these prejudices exist, but we're trying to show that people can fight against them in their own way.
Yeah, it's like the thing about like I think you were talking about the age thing, right? You have your neuroplasticity, like becomes your mind becomes less like malleable as you grow old, right? It seems that like people who are like old right now and who were like progressives back in the day, like you don't just become unprogressive. You have like maybe you have less like open opinions, but you don't just become like you just like switch up and you're just like, oh yeah, rights, nobody gets them. Nobody gets rights, It's just
I mean, there are some people who really, it's very weird, but I think I lend that more to I'm very careful when I say this, but to some degree senility and other things, where it's like some people take just turns off the deep end in certain cases, but I think those are their individual circumstances rather than any particular age trend that just old people inherently just lose it,
Because if you think about it, like this is basically like the last generation. Like this is like probably the last generation when you have like people like shouting the N-word at you just because. Well, obviously, racism not going to be like over or anything. Like
oh no, not by any stretch of the imagination.
It's not going to be like blatant, open. Like if it's that, then you can just like brush it off, because it's not like the whole entirety of the world is just shouting that word at you or whatever. It's like it's more things like social circumstances and under the cover kind of stuff. It's like why they treat me different or whatever. It's like it's not like because it's not like segregation, and it's not like it's past the point where you're like they're still making like jokes about stereotypes without any kind of irony or like the idea that like that's just like it's okay. So we had this conversation about Rush Hour 3, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Rush Hour 3 conversation we had, like that's like one it's like a racist movie, right?
Right.
But I think that like it's like the racism for like the purpose of comedy. It's like Dave Chappelle racism, right? It's not like racism like, oh, let's point and laugh at this person because they're like, it's not ostracized. It's ostracizing.
It's not a minstrel show, but it's meant to be. It's meant to play it off in a way that is in a very charitable analysis of the film. It is meant to be something that plays it off rather than pointing and laughing at it and saying that it resembles reality, because obviously it doesn't. It's meant to be absurd. It's meant to tickle that uncomfortable part of us that's like, oh, I recognize that this is totally not okay, and that is exactly why I'm laughing at this, is because I am very uncomfortable.
It's like good edgy comedy. It's not like There's like it's like good edgy comedy and bad edgy comedy. It's like teenager like fucking just saying whatever.
Just saying the N-word and being
that's funny, right?
No, I said the gamer word.
And then there's like like satire under the guise of like racism. It's like
it's like Tropic Thunder, where it's like you have a character, you have a Robert Downey Jr. in blackface the entire movie, and yet it's like only now have people been like, wait a minute, and then critical analysis comes in, and they're like, oh, I see. This was literally like this was several layers of irony on top of each other, and it was meant to be a complete pastiche of how of Hollywood's sort of crass indifference towards hiring black actors and hiring actors of any sort of minority, and sort of the inherent minstrelly, or the inherent minstrel show that some Hollywood productions have become. Like it invokes all of those sort of inherent underlying. It uses it for the purpose of telling a point, not for just being like, Robert Downey Jr. is now playing someone in blackface, or alternatively the worst possible outcome, which is Robert Downey Jr. is literally in blackface and just playing a blackface character, just literal minstrelly, like, you know.
Yeah, that's basically the thing. It's like there's ironic, like it's like, yeah, it's a satire versus like playing it straight. Like we say that we're like way like 5 layers of irony, but then that's like there's like a difference between like, okay, there's like a difference between like playing it straight and it's harmful, and then playing ironically and it's like harmful in the way that's like on the surface. And there's like a post irony where it's like it's harmful because ironic and not genuine, you know. And then there's like just genuine after that.
There's satire is useful when it's utilitarian. Satire is useful when it tells a point. Satire is not useful when it's just used as some sarcastic invocation of like, this is a thing and I'm just doing it. And the line between it being a genuine depiction and it being irony is blurred, when Poe's law starts being invoked, you know that you kind of hit a bad end. Like, you are not doing something correct. You either need to rethink your strategy or you need to rethink the way that you're thinking. Because if you're trying to tell a genuine message, you are obviously failing. If you are not trying to tell a genuine message, fix your life. Please. Yeah. Like, just stop.
No matter how absurd you get, there's someone like, yeah, it's perfectly rational opinion. And that's Poe's law, obviously. But like, at that point, like, I guess like there's a certain point where it's like, what can you do? And there's like another point where it's like, you can do something. So it's like, what can you do is like the point where it's like, this is so ridiculously outside of the lane of rational people. Like, no one in their right mind would agree with this. And then like that person, like the outlier. And then there's like, this is like close enough. It's like, what's it called? Well, I don't want to bring him up as an example because I really don't want to talk about him. But you know, never mind. It's just like, I'm just saying, you might know who I'm talking. You might know who I'm thinking about.
Oh, I have no clue. I'm dense as a brick, man.
Okay, good. Good. You know, I'm just thinking like I don't want to mention any names because then I'll just be like, that'll be attracting a different crowd. I don't want to fucking think about.
We'll stay away from. I've already done my fair share of damage to the potential viewership.
Yeah.
Sorry, all people over 60 that I've just alienated with my comments on senility.
Everyone over 60 is like fucking.
Yeah, there's some weird champs right now that are happening. They're not pleased.
They're not talking right now. But it's just like how, because I want to think about like TV. Like we kind of underrating TV right now. You know, we all like, a lot of people watch TV, right? But we're not influenced by TV as much as we are anymore. Like, you know, sure, like, you know, BoJack Horseman is like one of my favorite shows of all time. Obviously, it's like affected me like emotionally, but you know, and like if I think back on like, even if like that show has deeply affected me, like in my thought process, like how much has it really like influenced like the way I think? You know, even
it didn't really teach you any lessons. Like,
it's like it just gives you a different perspective, but it didn't like tell me anything I didn't like know in general. You know,
it isn't Will and Grace anymore. Like it isn't there's no longer. And I think that's largely because Hollywood has largely stopped trying to tell narratives that evoke difficult issues and has instead sort of just decided to try to do whatever they can to make money, which is like, yep, that's just the inevitable course, along with TV's growing irrelevance in modern day life, where TV has largely become relegated to the shock factor for people who are still watching it, where you have like the the chain of denigration when it comes to like, you know, the History Channel used to actually talk about history and the horrors of war and the horrors of racism, and nowadays it's like a bunch of guys selling pawn shop stuff and doing antiques and aliens and conspiracy theories and all of these different things that are like, they're designed to be attractors rather than being actually content. Like, instead of generating content, that's where content has now become like on more digital spaces. And even then, like, we've seen this sort of the commodification of the online sphere too, where now it is more profitable to make filler content than it is to actually go in and like try to make something entertaining and try to make something that just doesn't exist, which is just weird.
I guess it's just like what comes with the commodification of anything, really, because
it gets cheaper. It gets cheaper, and it's cheaper to produce. It's cheaper to manufacture, and it's more cost effective to manufacture it in large amounts. Yeah. Which is what you end up content farming, and like, don't call Sans the Skeleton after 3 a.m. and you're like, I am genuinely confused what led humanity down this path where we have just this constant deluge of just shit.
I mean, everyone knew that was where it was going to end up, but like, you never know. Like, you can't tell the future, obviously. You don't know exactly where it's going to end up, but right. You know, online we're like, okay, the future is going to be like, you know, cool new content, you know, cool stuff. New people are going to come around. Like, yeah, it happened, but like, it's leaning towards that, you know, money making angle. Like, you know, mm-hmm. It's like, you don't think, like, you think of the future, but you don't think like, yeah, YouTube demonetization is definitely going to be an issue in the future. Like, back in the day, you didn't think people were even making money off of it, and then now, you know.
If you had told 2012 me that was going to be a thing when I was first really, like, you know, I mean, I watched YouTube back in 2008, obviously. Like, that was when I really had gotten into it. But, like, 2008, 2009, 2010, if you had told me back then that was the way that YouTube was going to go, like, people were going to have to self-censor and, like, issues about actual problems on these platforms were going to be periodically censored and deprived of any sort of, you know, people, again, we kind of come back to the topic before, which is like people selling their souls to corporations. It's like people who need this money to live in some cases are being deprived of this because they said the wrong thing in this case. And it's not even like something that's like, you know, it's not about social ostracism. It's about the fact that advertisers are hungry and that they don't want, they are in a buyer's market. They can choose what is and is not acceptable, and that is a bit terrifying on any level, because they have a monetary incentive to make everything as squeaky clean as humanly possible.
Like, they're not just a landlord; they're like what's it called?
They're the police.
The police, like a master, like judge, jury, executioner. You know?
Yeah, they have an unbridled. They have an unbridled sort of. They have a level of control over the content making process on YouTube, which is heretofore just unheard of. But it does, to be fair, it also models television, where advertisers don't want to be placed next to shows that cause controversy. They don't want their brand associated with certain things, which is just this sort of like, this starts to evoke the question of like, is the advertising model truly beginning to fail us? Will there need to be, like, is the alternative model for like Twitch, where it's like, you know, you pay $5 and you can support, you pay $5 a month and you support someone directly. Does that model lend itself better to content that means something, to content that is unbridled, to content that doesn't have any particular monetary aims apart from just existing? Like, to what degree do these newer forms of economic incentives generate better content? And are they the way forward?
It's a difference in structure, really. Then,
yeah,
it's because on the like we gotta like remember, like, even like Twitch didn't like even exist in like 2010. You know, it's like, but it feels like such a part of like the sticking power of these platforms is like insane. You know, it's
I mean, even now, Twitch is starting to have problems with like the RIA, and they're starting to crack down on the DMCA and the problems people are having with being able to even keep VODs up. It's incredibly sad because it's leading to a literal destruction of history again. But in the end, I mean, it's just very weird how all of these platforms. I don't get it. I don't get how all of these. And I know the answer secretly underneath, which is like it's just the inevitable. They need more money, and money does not like money. There is never a point at which a shareholder says, "I am totally satisfied with the amount of money that this company is currently making me." It is always, how can you cut costs? How can you raise profits? How can you make more people buy Twitch Prime? How many people, like, how can you make people buy more subs? How can you make people buy bits? Let's place the bar for getting bits at the top, like, closer to your field of vision than your own profile. Put get bits at the top. Like, just these intrinsic dark patterns which are made to increase profit centers and to really make it a bigger enterprise than it was. It's always about expansion, and it is never about maintenance. A company is almost never in maintenance mode unless they are a consultancy. In which case, like, you look at IBM, which has become essentially a gigantic consulting firm. IBM is not concerned about making headfall anymore. They are not making computers anymore. They are not making much software anymore. All they're cared about is keeping their base stable. So, like, you have this weird sort of, there are very few companies in active mainstream consciousness that are not trying to rapidly expand and keep that profit center increasing. And it's very perverse to me because it's just like, you take these good things, these beautiful good things, and then they just go down the shitter just so quickly because someone decided that this wasn't making enough money.
That's like the going public thing, right? Where you have like, you go and you're at the mercy of the stockholders now because of various reasons. Like if you have a website that you could, like, you have YouTube, which is like, founded by a few people, few programmers for PayPal or whatever, and they don't realize like the shit they're getting into because this is like early on, right? And this website has potential, but you don't realize like the great like links you can go to have such like a gigantic website. Because like, Google wasn't like, we have Google now, which is like literal like Big Brother, fucking data collection agency, and you have Google then, which is like, okay,
do no evil.
It's like Google. Oh, I can finally find a picture of a hot dog online.
Yeah, I can. This is space age technology. I can go, like, I can literally take the unbridled knowledge of the internet and just find anything that I want. And nowadays, it is the literal arbiter of knowledge, where it returns results before you have to ever go to a website, which includes the illegitimate scraping of websites' contents for their own good, of course. Or for Google to just present the information then, and then make it so you don't have to click on another website.
This is why you fucking DuckDuckGo. Everyone thinks I'm crazy. Everyone thinks I'm an insane person.
I mean, you're right. I mean, you're right to be concerned about that. I would say it's just like lots of people value the pragmatic approach more than the actual, like, like if everybody actually cared about what they were doing, we'd all talk on IRC. And we'd all, write letters rather than using massive email services, and we'd all have our custom emails. Like we all run email services out of our house, and we'd all. Well, it's just even then. It's like, do you really, if you're really concerned about privacy, do you really know that they're going to always be able to uphold your privacy? Yeah. Which is one of those things that is just the end game of being. Of privacy is the ratio between pragmatism and safety, where you want to be as pragmatic as humanly possible while maintaining as much safety as humanly possible. And we have not found, for some ungodly reason, aside from a few major examples, we have not really found the formula for this yet somehow, because cryptography is still somehow majorly disconnected from the actual sphere of, and most of that's money, because it doesn't pay to add ETE. Like, end-to-end encryption is not a money-making option.
And then
It's
most people
just
won't notice unless you're like a person who's like conscious about security.
Mm-hmm. Well, because it's just not something that people think about. Because it's not. I mean, they think about it, but it's like they think about it in all the wrong ways. Which is that they understand that companies are out to profit on information, but in general, they either have and I've had people say this to my face before. I have nothing to hide, which is the most like
I hate that.
one of the more completely and utterly confusing defenses I've ever heard. I don't just because I don't want to use my rights right now doesn't mean that it means I just want to make sure that they're enshrined that I can't use them.
Just take them. Take every info.
Yeah.
Take all of it. Okay.
Just do it. There's no point. There's no there. And then there's the other side, which is like I care about this stuff, but I just don't know. I just don't have the mental energy to it. Setting up PGP for email is an actual fucking nightmare. Like if you want to be secure, you get a PGP key. You get out. You publish your private, or you do not publish your private key. You publish your public key, and then you give people the information to verify that you are the person who wrote that message, and that only the recipient can receive the message. Like it's beautiful. Asymmetric cryptography is a godsend, but somehow we managed to make it so that it is ungodly unwieldy to use, and then no normal person can ever actually just write an encrypted email and send it over the wire. Instead, it has to be these people who say, "I'm so sorry, but can you please install like OpenPGP?" And then you get the responses, "What the fuck is PGP?
Yep.
PGP sounds like a drug. Like, are you telling me to do drugs?" Like, there's this confusion. There's this mental sort of block because it is in this realm of techies doing techie stuff rather than like this is just a basic expectation for mankind is that we're just not gonna have people snooping on our communications. And then you get the appeals to authority, but
it's the authority figures, like thinking about like what information first of all information authority figures have over anyone else, enough to make some person like say, oh well, forget it, I don't want to think about it, and all these companies, like if you think about like, oh man, all my Google searches are doing Google and I can't stop it, or are you like, or you think about like, you think about like in the baseline, I have all my Google searches are stored at Google, and I can do whatever they want with it and use it for whatever. Like, okay, well, it's like you have like a defeatist attitude for it. You're like, well, might as well give up now. No point in thinking about it. It's like a kind of like sad realization. Like, well, but it's like the people who can get past that and like say, oh, well, I don't want them to have any more of my information or whatever. Those are the people who survive in that.
Google already has a profile on me, but that doesn't mean that profile should be any easier to collect. Like, I think the inevitable end game is to accept that like you're going to always leak information, but you want to OPSEC is keeping that leakage as low as humanly possible and as meaningless as humanly possible. And true OPSEC is just trying your best to keep pragmatic OPSEC at the very least is keeping yourself reasonably anonymized at all times within the practical reasoning of just interacting with other people, which really should motivate more software authors, myself included, to do more to make encryption a reasonable process rather than something that is like scary. Like there just has to be. We need more public consciousness on this. We need more mainstream attention on like there are reasons why when the government says, yeah, so we're going to start mandating that backdoors be put into encryption. There needs to be more than just a bunch of techies saying, please, for the love of God, do not do this. There is so much wrong with what you are saying, and we cannot refute it because you will not listen.
And it's because you're the standard. You'll arrest us if we disagree too hard.
Well, exactly. And it's like at some point it becomes that sort of like you really do rely on everything being in perfectly good faith in order for everything to happen. And so far, everything has been in reasonably good faith. That is not going to be curried for any longer than it needs to be. Mm-hmm. Like the system is not perfect. The system will not survive. It will eventually collapse. And when it does, it's going to collapse harder than any system in the entire modern world, I would say. Like once American republicanism collapses, it is on its ass and it's just gone. Like we are going to suffer hard, and it's going to be interesting to see what will happen and if we'll be alive for it, which I imagine we will be. But
It's in a general sense, maybe. So humanity might exist, you know.
And then all the encryption nerds will be like, "Hey,
I was right. I was right.
Yeah, what now?" And then they'll immediately fail to install it again, and they won't have any documentation this time. The ArchWiki will be gone, and they'll be completely screwed.
Imagine if the entire obviously it's not completely possible at this point, but imagine if the entire internet just disappears, right? Not actually.
It's not even really that far fetched. An EMP bomb, boom. That's most of the internet gone right there. I mean, if it detonates over LA, goodbye. See you later. Yeah. Silicon Valley's dead. Redmond's
if you
just
have all those servers. Well, they have a bunch of different servers, but yeah, it definitely fuck up everything.
But the main backbone of the internet is essentially dead. Part of the problem with the NSA's wiretapping of the entire known world was that the Five Eyes program essentially used the America as a backbone for communications, which meant that there was lots of internet traffic just being routed through America and being snooped on by the NSA. But this was part and parcel to the fact that all these major telecom providers were complicit in this, and they were the ones doing all the bridging cabling between different places. So all of these short path routes through America were inherently compromised, and as a result, it's what happens when those disappear? Because let me tell you what, there ain't going to be too much redundancy when things completely fail. We already have moments where just half the internet goes out because some DNS or some backbone provider misconfigured some record on their routing protocol, and all of a sudden it's sending bad routing information to the entire network, and you just have BGP just completely collapses. And you're just like, wait a minute, I can't even load Google. Something is terribly wrong. The world has gone topsy-turvy.
Yeah. Imagine Amazon Web Services completely dies. Half of the internet would be utterly fucked.
Oh, if AWS died, we would see the modern world would grind to a halt, and that in and of itself should be enough to make any sane person weep, because the fact that we rely on one service so heavily is just
we put all of our eggs in one basket, basically.
Yeah, if there was just if someone is able to induce a massive multi-drive crash on S3, can you imagine? I imagine they do backups, but to what degree? S3 buckets are supposed to be fairly transient. So, to what degree are S3 buckets going to survive if there was a major drive crash, or if there was something what's their backup plan? I mean, what's the backup plan in general?
It's you gotta remember, in the universe, there's nothing that has a 0% chance other than laws. We can't Well, actually, there might be there are definitely physics you shouldn't. Gravity makes it so you probably shouldn't. You can't fly, right? But there are examples in which you can fly through machines or flapping your fucking wings or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So
if you not out your bones, then you might be able to. I wouldn't recommend it, but
put helium in your system, you'll fly.
This podcast does not officially advocate hollowing out your bones.
Oh, that's a bad idea, but
you
can't get sponsorships that
way. Yeah. Our sponsor required us to put in this notice that we do not officially advocate hollowing out your bones, and in fact, most medical professionals will indeed tell you that is, quote, a dumb fucking idea. Just ask your doctor. Ask your doctor.
Well, yeah, what was I saying? I was saying that there's a non-0% chance of anything happening in the universe. Even the universe just stopping at a snap of a finger, non-zero chance, no matter what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Physics could change right now at complete random. That's a non-zero chance, no matter what happens. So,
right.
I don't know, how many of these systems...
We're assuming that the physical law... We're on good faith, we're assuming that the physical laws will continue to operate tomorrow.
Yeah. How many of these systems that we have in place, first of all, are, able to survive for, years of, until 2030, right? 2037 in particular. I think they're having, issue with, time, another time thing, whatever. But that's another difference. And, how many of these, account for the idea that maybe they're not even maybe it will happen eventually one day, It'll happen. Oh, it's him. Oh, you
Oh,
can't.
is everything alright?
It just like stopped. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. There we go.
Stop. Okay. I don't know.
Well, is Discord having issues?
I think Craig's doing it.
Oh, Craig. Craig.
Oh my god. Well, this
is gonna be an edit point.
Yeah, it'll happen. Or whatever. It'll be fine. I'm pretty sure it'll take like longer time rendering than me to edit this actual thing. You know.
This is why Twitch is. This is. There should be some live podcasts at some point.
Yeah, it should like stream. You know. But I mean, I only stream like extremely late. But yeah. So make sure you stay in this time. I'll explain it. So what I was saying was like they should have an account. Like they should always like obviously you should have like an account for like not account, but like to account for the idea that yeah, it's gonna happen eventually. Like no matter what it is, it will fail eventually. We're just like praying, like please don't fail, please don't fail, please. Like every time we like use these systems, we're like, God, I really hope this doesn't fail today. Like and like you don't think about it. But it's like underneath, implied. It's like
you don't think about it unless you make it. Let me tell you that from experience. Is whenever I made something, my first thought whenever I run it is like, just don't stop working. Like I'm praying with you for all that is good and holy that everything that I have done up to this point has led to a solid experience. And if it hasn't, I'm completely plumb screwed. So let's just assume that everything's gonna work fine. But
it's fucked up. And you have to like think like, oh god, it's gonna.
That's I mean, not to get on a tangent, but like that's software engineering in a nutshell. Software engineering is the only engineering adjacent discipline where people are genuinely like, don't trust us. Like, don't. For the love of God. Like, you talk to someone who builds a bridge and they're like, this bridge is secure. Like, this bridge is meant to take thousands of people and allow them to cross at any given time. Or you talk to an aerospace engineer and it's like they built a plane and it's like this plane is literally rated for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of flight hours. Like you could take this motherfucker just across the world thousands of times and it would do absolutely fine. And then you have software engineers who say computerized voting is terrifying and you should never trust it. Because God only knows that we don't do this correctly and that there are constantly issues. It's the only engineering discipline where not only are issues accepted, they are expected and essentially codified against, where it's like, just don't trust it to work. Don't trust it at any given point to function, because if it doesn't, then you will not cry yourself to sleep, unlike the engineer who has to work at 1 a.m. trying to figure out why it's boot looping.
But I guess it's like implication with programming or software in general. Like with code, no matter what you do, you'll have some issues, some glitch, even if it's like complete random. You don't know what's going on. Like you read all the books, like it should make sense, should work every single time. There will be some kind of issue with some random.
Yeah, I mean that's what it is.
It's like you can't like avoid that kind of thing. With at least with like the bridge engineer, civil engineering, you have the idea that okay, we've done this many times, right? We have this bridge that's been up since like literally 100 years with some maintenance. If we build it this way, our hypothesis is that it will consistently work always, and well, not always, but will consistently work, and we'll be able to detect it pretty easily when it doesn't work. So you can just like shut it, repair, go and fix it. Like okay, it's fine. And then like you have it's like you build it up from the bottom. Obviously, it's like any kind of like discipline, like project, you build it up from the bottom, and you can do live maintenance on it whenever. It's like, but whenever it's like software engineering, you have to like remember like updates. Well, updates are like not. First of all, they're not always for every software. You can't, like not everyone updates their software even like at once. Like now we can do it now, but there's like a point where it's like, okay, how much does it need? How much broken does it need to be for me to have to go back and like put some of my time in there and then fix it again? It's like that's for anything. That's not for a software engineer. That's for any like thing. But I'm thinking like that's like you have the idea that when you build a bridge, you have like, if I build it this way, it's going to consistently work. But in software engineering, or just programming, I guess you will just have like, I'm not sure this is going to work. Let's pray, let's hope, and then I'm pretty sure I might have to fix something later. God, I hope I can fix it later. You know?
Right. Well, I mean, and that's very weird to me because software engineering, especially with updates, like even as a software engineer, I don't always apply updates because when you know, there are certain things where it's like, especially, and I'm very bad with OS updates, and I know I shouldn't be because there are vulnerabilities in every OS update that you're supposed to fix. But to some degree, it's like, I also know that companies generally don't itemize their change lists very well, and as a result, they typically don't test these changes very well, and people recognize that. People recognize when they upgrade major versions and all of a sudden their phone goes from like lasting 10 hours to lasting 2, and they're like, what the fuck is happening? Like, this is not okay. Like, this is you have made my device unusable because of your goddamn update. And that's why people are told, wait until the major update. Wait until the fanboys immediately upgrade their system. And then once they have encountered every foot gun that's humanly possible and it's been all patched out, then major upgrade, because then you'll be fine. Then you won't be stuck in a boot loop having your device just consistently be unusable. You'll be able to have the retrospection of like, oh, all of these issues have now been fixed. That's part of the problem, is that fixes typically induce other problems, which then in turn induce fixes. So I think it's because it's a treadmill. I think the problem with software updates is that they are truly just a absolute treadmill. There is nothing. Yeah, you're not running a sprint. You're running a marathon.
Yeah, because you can sprint a bridge. It might be a crappy bridge, but it'll be a bridge that you can say like, oh yeah, I knew it was gonna be crappy because we built it fast and we have these resources or whatever.
Well, a bridge usually shows signs of wearing too. Like there are things that are generally observable by people, and sometimes falsely observable, like concrete cracking and other things. Where it's like when concrete cracks on a bridge, and people are like, "Oh my God, is it safe?" And the engineer's like, "I promise you, it's just stress, and it's expected to happen. We designed it for this. We literally have this in like there are steel girders underneath that. That bitch ain't moving anywhere, like just because some concrete's cracking." It just shows how good that we've created this thing, is that it's taking out the stress on the concrete rather than bending in the middle or creating a haunting melody like the one in LA did. Like there's this sort of, software engineering doesn't have that. Software engineering has metrics, but those metrics are typically, for the end user, uptime. Is it up? Good. Done. Doesn't matter. I don't give a shit how many requests it's handling per second. Not my problem.
You're not supposed to know about. Like the thing is, you're not supposed to know about the back end. You're like the more you know about the back end, the worse. Especially when
it's magic. It's supposed to be magic. Discord was great at that because their software looks like magic, when in reality it is a crazy software stack that probably has more issues than we can humanly name, and yet they somehow make it look like it's some front end magic act. It's just you just create a server and there it is. There it is. It's done. You created a server. Boom. It just
that's like amazing UI.
They can even put sarcastic little messages in, like, "Oh, another server." Like they can play the cutesy corporation that wants to make everything kind of a meme, which in small doses is fine. It adds a human element. In big doses, it can get awfully grating, especially when you get "ooh woo, I'm sorry, but I had a massive error." Like you get to the point where it's like error messages start getting awooified. You lose it because it's like, give me information, like tell me what's wrong, and that's when the illusion that I think that's where the PR system breaks. Is like when something happens that it's almost like a story. When you pierce the veil of the suspension of disbelief that this is all magic, you want useful information. You don't want some Hawaii message that like we're having problems. Like no, you want actual concrete information as to what is happening right now. You want a status update. You want to know when your suspension of disbelief can return, because otherwise you're just left. You're left at this conscious impasse that the magic has faded. And you're left with somebody dangling their hands saying, "Ooh," like, the magic act is ended, but they're still acting like there's some sort of, the veil is still there for them. So there's an impedance mismatch when it comes to like when it fails, it needs to fail in a way that respects the user's intelligence, rather than being like completely and utterly useless and patronizing.
Yeah, it's like
and software engineers don't get that sometimes, or rather, the people who talk to software engineers don't get that, I guess.
It's like, okay, so you have the person who's like deep in the trenches, looking at every single like line of code, wondering how do I fix this fucking issue that was plaguing us since day one, since we went gold or whatever they say. That's what I think he's in gaming, but so he's in gaming. But you have that person, and you have the person who's like literally just like, like a three like literal teen, like preteens who are like swiping down, touching like, putting dumbass comments on whatever thing your social media using. Let's just put that as an example.
Like a YouTube video. They're the people who comment first, even though that hasn't existed since 2008.
Yeah. And you have like the in between would be like, I guess Discord's like doing it. Yeah, Discord is doing it because we're using Discord's a very powerful like communication device, especially like in terms of like mass communication. Like you had Skype where you had like maybe like I don't know how many. I didn't use Skype that much, so you maybe had like 10 people. I don't know.
Well, yeah. I mean, no, there wasn't really a max. You could have big group calls, but they were always very chaotic and they were very difficult to sort of. Skype was always its UI was very obtuse, and it didn't feel. It was AIM essentially. It gave that same sort of kind of. It felt like a messenger rather than a messaging platform.
Yeah, it was.
It felt like a phone. It felt like a phone rather than a chat application on a computer.
I think like it's basically just like that Skype was like the rotary phones of like video communication, and now we're at like the fucking iPhone 11 of like thing communication. Like you have this like clunky big old thing that might have some kind of charm today, but there's really just like we're like past the point where it's like you can it's like simplicity now. It's like you have, so that's really the gist you want to go for. Like the people who make the GUI, like good job. Makes like even my dumbass can go and make a server like at the snap of a finger.
Right.
Make this happen like immediately. And the fact that you can even do that so quickly is like the magical thing about it. Like you could have like that's the thing. I play with a lot of software. I have a being a streamer, a YouTuber person or whatever creator.
Right.
I have a bunch of different ideas for like content or whatever, and I have to play with a lot of software. And you can like immediately tell which software you're gonna be like, okay, I can get used to this, and then like ones are like, oh, I gotta use this. It's like okay, you have for instance, I was learning Blender recently, right?
Okay, yeah. One of the most notoriously difficult to learn pieces of software that you named essentially the worst piece of software to learn because of how difficult it is to learn.
It's literally just like you're stepping. As soon as you open it, you're like, you see a blank square, and you're like, well, I guess I'm gonna look up tutorials now, because you have absolutely no fucking clue what's going on in any like all these buttons on the side, flips, world settings, lighting, like your brain's like exploding, right? There's no tutorial for it. There's no nothing. Like it's pretty much like because it's 3D software, it's like inherent to the the actual like to the format of it. It's like pretty complex, which is it's like it makes sense. But that's even like one of the more accessible ones. If you go on the fucking Maya, you probably have like a lot more shit to worry about or different shit. And
it's a different ballgame.
Yeah, that's why like you see like you see a lot, and then compare that to let's say what's a 2D animation software like Flash, right? Adobe Flash. It's not like extremely simple. There's a lot of quirks to it, but even like 12-year-olds can get into it without like extreme.
Right, because Newgrounds existed, right? Yeah. Like it was something where people could express themselves better than better than any sort of. And I think that lends itself to like Blender specifically is a great example of like they recently redid the UI entirely, and beforehand the UI was essentially it was programmer UI. It was the GUI was a programmer UI. It was the way that the programmers had essentially laid out everything in a way that made sense to them, and it showed. But people got used to that. There were people who could work damnably fast with it because they just knew every keybind. They knew every single shortcut. If something wasn't bound to a key, they knew how to get to it.
That's what that's the thing with this software in particular. If you have, I think it's like if you have, it's not even like if you have a bad UI, but if you have like a complex UI, it's like going and clicking around and finding the thing is like immensely hard compared to just learning a couple of there's a keyboard of keybinds versus like screwing around the software for like days trying to find where do I find this thing? How do I resize? Fuck, I don't remember. It's like there's like that's a learning curve.
Well, this is where you introduce dark patterns too. Like you get things like, for example, like I was saying with Twitch, where Twitch's Get Bits UI, where it's like that's one of the biggest features on their entire. The UI for Twitch is fairly simplistic. There are very few buttons, but those very few buttons include one gigantic button, one of the only ones that's labeled that says Get Bits.
Yep.
Specifically in order to encourage people to buy more and to, continue supporting Amazon's profit centers. But that's very weird to me because that is essentially that's the juxtaposition of UI, where it's like you can have a very simple UI and it can still be. Have you ever tried to add a friend on Twitch?
I have completely avoided that feature. Yeah.
Yo, it is not fun. I tried to do it today, and it was not. What you have to do is you have to go down to the lower left corner and go to your whispers. And there's just this little search bar that says search to add friends. And that's the only place that you can do that. You cannot go to someone's profile and add them as a friend. You have to search them up in this one location and then add them as a friend from there. Which is like one of those things that it's like, sure, I get that it's not necessarily the most prominent feature in the entire world. It's not something that everybody does because it's not really necessary. Twitch is not a social networking platform. But at the same time, there's this sort of weird, like, if you're going to have a feature, don't make it hidden under 5 layers of, like, the same with YouTube's PM system before it got completely shit-canned, was that it was buried. It was buried like they just didn't want to talk about it anymore, which is probably exactly what happened, is that some engineer was told, make this as hard to find as humanly possible, relegate it under some menus. We're going to deprecate it at some point. Don't make people stumble on this. Make it so that people who want it can find it, and that people who don't know where it is can't. It's a balance between, in UI, it's a constant balance between trying to make something accessible, but also making it aligned with the goals that you have for a platform. Twitch is a great example of how certain things are perfectly easy to do and other things are ungodly difficult to do because they are in one particular location and you can't do it anywhere else. Yeah. Like it's editing panels.
They de-incentivize, basically.
Well, yeah, but editing panels was one where I was looking through my channel settings and I was like, I want to edit this panel. And I'm like, wait a minute, how do I do that? There's not any features here for editing panels. Where is the edit panel feature? Oh, I have to go to my page and then click on edit panels on the front of my profile so that I can edit the panels. Why can't I do that in the settings? Isn't the settings the most logical place to have things like that? I mean, sure, it's nice that I can edit them right from my front page, but why is that the one place that I'm supposed to be able to do it? Does that make it simple? It makes it simple, but it doesn't make it logical. It doesn't make it easy. It doesn't make it. It just sort of it goes against inclination, which is the worst sin in UX as far as I'm concerned, is that user experiences should not go against a user's inclination. If you try to micromanage someone's experience, that they have to use a feature in a certain way, they will inherently hate that feature as a result, because they want to just be able to do something in a way that makes logical sense. They'll look a certain place, and if the feature is not there, they will either get upset or they will just stop caring.
So like, if you have an assumption about like what the software does, then you should be able to like, oh, like that, yeah, it's like this button does this thing, and then it like matches what your assumption is. Like, okay, that's like good design.
Well, yeah, I call it cow paths, or it is like cow paths, or desire paths as they're more commonly known. When people, when cows, and when for more generally people, walk in certain directions, they generally bleed a line in the grass that shows the most optimal path that people tend to take, because they'll take that same path because it's easiest. Usually it cuts right through grass, so you get this nice dead path of grass that happens as people walk, because that is the most simple way for them to do it, and that's the most natural inclination. But instead, we have sidewalks that go at perfect 90-degree angles that don't have any sort of, they don't take any of this into account. So then you have just these weird random patches of dead grass where people who naturally sort of just walk in these different directions. It's that same metaphor where it's like when somebody extends in a certain direction, they want to be able to do something in a certain way. And if they don't get it that way, it feels very foreign. It feels like, how many times have you used software and been like, dude, what the fuck? Why isn't this why is this feature not under view? Or why is this not under window? Why is this not under edit?
And this tiny thing on the edge of this, under this, like it's such a
why is this like this? And I don't get it. I don't get why. And to some degree, I think it's blindness, because I think it's like some people don't take into account the fact that, like, maybe you should ask someone, like, hey, does this make sense? Like, do you get, does this feature that I'm putting in, like, again, this factors back to the PR example where it's like you need to bring in a third person and be like, is this all right? And they'll say, are you serious with right now? Like, is this all right? No, this is not all right. That is a major feature that you are hiding under 5 menus. Put that at the front.
That's because the way it loops back is that, like, that's the basis of constructive criticism, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have this thing, this project you're working on, and then you have people to observe it. That's why someone like looks at a movie pre-show viewing, and they might change a few scenes, change the editing. You have people who like listen to the album or whatever. People who just finished mastering it or whatever, and you have people right now doing YouTube videos and saying, all right, look at this video I just made unlisted, whatever. And that's like the kind of, because there's people who want, like, when you get to the top, obviously you have a lot more yes men, because when you're like when you're on the ground level, when you're underground or whatever, you're like, let's just say in like the art forms, like let's say music, you're a rapper, right? And you're trying to make an album that's like amazing, or like the best you can do at that point. You like, and you like you want to hear what people have to say, because, or at least people like you respect have to say, because you want it to be the best it could be, so you can have some kind of success, at least for like the critical sense, right? And if you go to the top, you obviously have people who are like, again, like putting their feet digging their feet into the ground and saying, no, I'm the best, I made it up here, so you can't tell me shit, because it's like I can't be told wrong because I've done all this stuff. It can't, like, they're like plugging their ears in, and it's like there's like people
hubris.
It's hubris. There's like a humility to like certain people, and then there's like a pride. But in certain like avenues where it's like more objective sense kind of stuff, like calculations and stuff, like there's like more proof and concepts that you need to be able to prove like this isn't going to work or whatever. When it comes like to business or like management, it's like, okay, you need to prove to us that this won't lose us money. Being honest to our customers isn't paying the bills. It's like.
But I think it's also easier to like imagine, like when you're an artist, for example, it's far easier, in my opinion, to be egotistical in terms of be righteously egotistical. Where you're like, I did get here, and like it's all a matter of taste. Like aside from a few things, like if you decide to create a song that is just literally full of racial slurs, like then obviously you're going off the deep end, and somebody should tell you that you need to stop. But like aside from obvious errors like that, where people try either consciously make decisions that are completely and utterly just totally off the wall crazy, or they make decisions that don't benefit them in any sort of way, there isn't sort of a recourse for that. Creativity doesn't lend itself to logical.
Yeah, because I guess it just goes against each other basically. Because there's like logical thought and creativity are they're typically seen as like the antithesis of each other. You know, it's like one side of it is like you have like logical thought where it's like, okay, this is the rational thing to do, and this is where it should possibly, this is like where it should be always here. Like, let's see, what am I trying to say? It should, okay, there's like rational thought where it's like, this seems to be right, and I think that there's a way to prove that this is right. And then there's like creativity where it's like, well, we shouldn't settle on what we think is right now, or what we think is like, this answer to this question, because there's a bunch of different answers you can have. So, like, and it's like that kind of hubris that you like don't listen to each other, that goes between both ways. It's like, so if you have rational thought, you're like, okay, I'm the rational one. I found my answer, and there's no way like you can prove that's wrong, so I must be right. And there's like creativity was like, well, there's no answer to be found, and my answer is the right ones.
It isn't as procedural. That's why I have a little more sympathy for somebody who just has hubris and sort of just someone who has hubris about their creative process and says, like for example, when an artist changes up their style completely and they're like, listen, this is my vision. This is exactly what I want to do. This is the career decision that I want to make. And when it inevitably backfires on them, they're like, oh boy, I don't know how I thought that I could do this. And nobody could talk them out of it at that time. With business, it's like, hey, would you not alienate half your customer base by putting a feature halfway down the fifth menu, down deep, and like a bunch of accordions? And would you not make public statements on your Twitter account that seem to suggest certain things and then completely go against them? Like, for example, Cyberpunk was a great example of that, where some of their Twitter accounts were saying, yep, no more delays. There's not going to be any more delays. Absolutely no more delays. And people were saying, yeah, I'm going to take the day off this day. Could you make sure that this is going to happen? No more delays.
No.
It was like, don't make promises. Stop.
I guess it's like at that point, it's just like a bad management. It's like no one told them like the step. No one told the PR guy like, oh yeah, we're gonna delay it a little more. Don't talk about the release date anymore.
Yeah, don't talk about delays. Like, don't respond to comments that are about delays. Like, what is wrong with you? Like, why are you stepping into that hornet's nest? Like, this is a game that was plagued by delays. Why are you talking about delays? Like,
you don't hear anything about fucking Square Enix. You hear like you don't hear them replying in the comments like, oh yeah, Final Fantasy 15. This definitely come out May 26, 2006, guys. All right.
Well, but it's just, I don't know. Again, part of it stems to the fact that, of course, I'm not a corporate. By trade, I'm a software engineer. I'm not a corporate guy. Being not a corporate guy means that I don't know the decision-making processes that are actually involved at the ground level of producing a PR team and trying to get that work done. It seems like they'd be able to work against it. It seems like for all the amount that they do, all the amount of damage control that companies do with their normal employees that they subcontract for their PR firm should be just as beholden to the same administrative rule sets that govern normal employees. Like, hey, how about you don't make unsubstantiated rumors? Or, hey, how about you don't make these weird sort of suggestions or, like, end up creating a brand account that, ends up getting attention in the wrong way. Like, I remember when brand accounts started becoming more sentient. Like, people started playing around with them more, like with Wendy's and the like, and people started just adding brands to try to see if they were hip or not. And I remember the furry community started adding Tony the Tiger.
Oh my god!
And it went I'm pretty sure, like Tony blocked some motherfuckers that day. Like, like there was some. There was anything from like memes to actual thirst, and it was the most like it was one of those things that you have to wonder what the PR team. I think the PR team kind of handled it the best way they can for a traditional corporation, which is like just don't play with it. Don't play with fire on this one.
Don't have Tony the Tiger be thirsty back, please.
Yeah, just let's not like let's leave that to the boys leave that to the big boys who have the money to burn if their PR goes completely tits up. Like there is time to be spent on good PR, and it is not worth trying to traipse through thirst DMs in order to find gems. It's very interesting to me because it just again represents this sort of. Those are the best PR teams. At the same time, they are the worst PR teams because they represent nothing but the next level of advertising, which is sentient advertising. Where it's like at some point, and this again not to be too like it all comes together, but the AI conversation we were having. At what point do brand accounts become AI?
That's a good. Actually, if you think about it, like actual AI bots are more popular than brand accounts who are like deliberately trying to appeal to this like social media based customer base, right?
Although judging by the fact the way Tay went, now that I think about it, Twitter bots and AI don't mix. So let's table that idea. But continue.
I'm just thinking like they have like literally shitpost bot like if people like it just because random if it's actually it's not like that's also like a point about internet humor, like humor in the internet age. You have like actual generated AI humor now,
and then it doesn't even have to be intelligent. I mean, to be fair, a lot of meme culture isn't very. We're not talking about the Library of Alexandria here. We're talking about Pepes and Peepos and all these stupid, the most. It's funny because Poggers, Weird Champ, all of these things that like. It's not highbrow, but at the same time, it's also like the fact that AI can produce it is an indictment, if anything. But like the fact that a random number generator can produce spicy memes is a sign that we truly do have randomness randomness at the core of this new kind of wave of humor. It's not bad.
Yeah, I mean it's a part of our culture now, but it's like. It's like culture, Culture doesn't say like you wouldn't say like for all the good that Jurassic Park did for CGI, you wouldn't say like it's the most highbrow film. It has some maybe some thoughts in there, but
it's an action film, and at its core, it's meant to be sort of a thriller. Like it was supposed to be revolutionary at the time for what it did, which was be pants-shittingly terrifying in terms of representing dinosaurs in a way that hadn't been done before. Up until that point, you had King Kong, who was a clay model, and Godzilla, who is, as far as I know, also a clay model. And, you kind of get better and better depictions. Animatronics started being factored in, bigger and better animatronics. And then you get these magnum opus films that completely blow everything out of the water. It doesn't mean they have to be highbrow or deep, but it means that technically they can be super, super important for. And likewise, AI is very important for, or can you even really is a random number generator an AI?
It's not intelligence though. It's like a calculator. So not really.
But like to what level are we just calculators? Like to what level? And I know this is sort of like this just drifts off into Joe Rogan territory. So I apologize. But like to what degree are we just calculators? To what degree is free will and consciousness just sort of a fabric that we tell ourselves in order to justify the fact that we're just making calculated decisions at any given point based on neurotransmitter activity? The fact that there's no real proof of any external consciousness, and that by and large we have really nothing that gives us anything other than the qualia, the experience of life. That's our only real figment that we still keep as proof that there is something deeper than just raw calculation. So in the end, it's like, to what degree are we just, calculation with a bit of RNG, right?
Yeah. I guess
so, like, to what degree is that, like...
It's kind of weird to think about because, artificial intelligence AI stands for artificial intelligence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like it's like where's the gauge on the intelligence, and also is it like it's only intelligence relative to us? You know, what's gonna
What is
happen when we like
intelligence?
yeah, what's gonna happen when we make a being that's like smarter than us? You know, then we won't be the intelligent ones anymore. You know.
Well, and to a degree, it'll be like we're the ones that are making the flawed decisions. Right now, we're looking at self-driving cars and thinking, "Oh, it almost ran over an old lady. That's really flawed." But soon it will be, "Wow, humans used to run over a lot of little old ladies too, and that was just the way that it happened." We take that for granted because that's not novel. It is not novel that we are a bunch of, we are a bunch of hairless apes piloting giant metal vehicles and trying not to kill each other. That is absolutely pants-shittingly terrifying. And yet we manage that risk by the fact that in general we all operate on good faith assumptions and we accept what happens as being the inevitable kind of entropy of bad circumstances. But when one of the many self-driving cars that are now on the market end up crashing under a semi in a sort of brutal fashion, there's all sorts of different giant rallying cries to get these things off the streets, and it's like these things have a better success rate than humans. So what the fuck's this? Like the fact that they're novel. It's the fact that they don't have any sort of the MIT. Did you ever do that MIT experiment where you had to decide who to keep alive and who to kill on a self-driving car?
Train trolley.
Well, no, not the trolley problem. It was self-driving. It showed a car, and it showed that if it kept on a current path, it would kill these people who were like either a woman or a man or young or old or feeble or not feeble in certain ways. And it was like it had all of these different parameters that tried to make it so that there was to make it more how to say it to sort of try to see what people's values were as an aggregate, like whose lives did they prefer, and to what degree was it like, did they just not, like to what degree did they make active choices to save other people's lives? Because it's like, for example, it comes down to the trolley problem, where it's like, do you make an active choice to kill one instead of indirectly killing five? Because if you, like, to what degree do you have agency to determine other people's lives or deaths, and to what degree do we give AI that agency? Because it has to have that agency. Sometimes there will be problems where that literally is unavoidable. I don't think they are as many as people describe them to be, because breaks exist. But given that we're assuming the breaks cut out,
sure.
Then, I mean, I think all bets are off. So what does an AI do?
I guess
splits it down the middle and gets a spare.
If you think about it, like, AI, like right now at least, like you generally like you assume they don't have any malice, but I can never be sure. But they don't have like emotions in the same way, at least as we do. Can an AI hold a grudge? Can an AI like see have the distinguishing qualities of like saying like, can you program racism into an AI? It's like,
and you certainly can.
and it's like implied, but it's like, if we like program in a certain way, then it's like we at least have like evidence that we can have that like this AI does that, like quantifiable technical evidence, and then we could literally like change, not we as in like the average consumer, but like the companies that are having this thing happen can change that from their resources. They're not like saying, oh, someone used our car to run over somebody, but that's not us. That's like that's the driver. We it's not our car. It's like, but also that like, but that does connect back to like how companies do have control over like at that point, companies could really like do anything with like the vehicle. I guess that might be like one of the reasons like we don't want self-driving cars, because like
we don't trust corporations.
Yeah, we don't trust corporations, and then like that trickles down to we don't trust AI. Because it's controlled by corporations. Like,
and we don't trust AI because it's not human.
Yeah.
I mean, at some point it becomes a tribalistic sort of, we don't want an algorithm. We don't want to think that an algorithm decides, even though we're probably running algorithms in our head to decide who to kill and who to leave alive. We're still thinking that there's this abstract quality on consciousness that allows us to epitomize it as an experience of consciousness and of conscious rather than just a calculation. It's seen as morality rather than calculation, when in reality it's just different parameters for the same calculation.
Yeah, it's like different. Because if you think about it, like it's because you pro like it's like a morality on. We still have this like thought process that like the emotion and depth of our like how we feel is like exclusive to us. Some people still do think like oh yeah, this being doesn't feel like emotion. Like oh yeah, dogs
Animals
don't feel
especially. Oh yeah,
dogs don't feel emotion because they're whatever they're creatures.
You look at them and you tell me those motherfuckers don't smile. Like you bastard! You can't tell me a dog doesn't smile. They
you can't. Like, I love how we have all these in-depth conversations about like the nature of AI and stuff, and we just like, oh man, dogs are cute.
Dogs are really cute. Dogs are very good. They're too blessed for this world of hatred and racism.
Yeah.
Are dogs racist? I don't think so. Well, they can probably be trained to be.
They can be trained.
That's kind of sad.
Well, actually, really that's like inhumanity too. Like you could be trained to be racist. Like it's not. It's like I
don't think babies don't really start. Do babies start out as racist? I don't.
That's like the big question of morality. I mean, the question like philosophy or whatever. That's like 1700s. Was it Voltaire? I don't remember. Some of those like we learned about those in fucking school. With the big thinkers of the Enlightenment were like, is humanity like inherently evil or is inherently good or just neutral? It's like.
Mm-hmm. To what degree are we a tabula rasa, and to what degree is some of our programming already predefined? Yeah. But of course, probably in the less in the humanist dimension and more in the theological dimension of, did God give us the ability to be good, or did God give us the ability to not be evil?
Like,
I don't know.
Because if you look at it a certain way, like you'll flip back and forth. Like if I look at the worst of Twitter, then yeah, I feel like, oh yeah, humanity's born evil, or at least this is like.
If I look at Twitter, humanity was born evil.
Yeah. Look, that's why I'm telling you. That's the reason I don't use Twitter. You can see that shit like on the fucking like because I typically try to stay away from like negativity, right? You can't stay away from like all negativity or whatever, but you try to like typically like have a positive or like open attitude towards stuff.
I follow VTuber accounts because if you can't understand what they're saying, then how can you really get any negative vibes from it? Like, if it's all in Japanese, then you're completely and utterly screwed. My timeline is half Japanese.
You can't form a deeper connection, but also you can understand Japanese to a point, right?
To varying degrees. There are lots of tweets that use slang and kanji that I don't know, but there's plenty of tweets where I do actually get the gist, and I can sort of either understand it or at the very least be like, oh, that's interesting, like, or learn something. Dare I say, But
it's like if I if I try to go into my Spanish or whatever, and I start looking up like Spanish accounts or whatever, and just like using that as my practice, like it's like the social like in language that's like the social used. Well, actually, what's the difference between like social media language and like actual vocalized language? It's like it's obviously we all use fucking lol or whatever, but
there's a difference. There's always been a codified difference between written language and spoken language for years, because in some ways they're just completely different registers, because like there is an informal register in writing nowadays that you cannot use in speech. It is too informal to be used in speech.
Yeah.
Like LOL does not translate well into speech. You can say it, but it doesn't mean anything, right? It's weird. It sort of seems still,
like it's not as like
it seems sarcastic. Like,
yeah,
but
right,
and it because it's sort of a faux pas. It's used as sarcasm because it directly violates a rule in a way that is flouting the rule, such that we can pay attention to it and be like, oh, look at this. Implicitly we're saying I'm flouting this rule to make a point. But at the same time, speech has always had this, because you don't write like you speak. If you wrote like you spoke, it would sound terrifically stupid. Like it just wouldn't make any sense. Like you would just be, and it's easier to do that when it's informal. When you're having informal conversations, sometimes you'll, like for example, I'll omit G's occasionally on the end of ing, because it's just, it's the way that you kind of speak normally. You're writing something. Like you don't say writing generally, yeah. But at the same time, it's still kind of weird. It's still not the norm. And if you're talking formally, you still might say writing, like without over enunciating it. But in writing, you would have to specifically, like, you cannot be casual. You cannot. There is a specific formal register. There's a formal register of speech, but the two just don't mix. There are definitely, etc. is another one of the, etc. is an example of that, where, you can't say etc, but you can write etc because it's an orthographic convention that we can represent this concept in this register with this phrase. Or you can write out the entire word etc. Or you can, there are all sorts of different, you can't say eg. You can, but it doesn't really, it feels weird. It feels stilted. Like you would say, for example,
it doesn't convey the message like the same way, because like it was made specifically for text language.
And it's just different registers. It's just a different way of comprehending the same sort of thing. It's different. It's two different ways of understanding language. But to a degree, that's always been interesting, because orthographic conventions develop. Orthographic conventions even develop different modalities. Like, for example, emojis. Emojis are not expressible through, are not directly expressible through speech, unless you, again, kind of use it as a parody. If you draw it as a satire, but
you literally just came out the emoji.
Nowadays, it's literally like there are critical analyses of what emoji mean, like double entendre, and the use of emoji as the use of emoji as conveying meaning apart from even text and apart from pictographs, as being its own separate, like, just new thing. Like, in addition to sound, in addition to text, you have emoji, this new modality through which meaning can be expressed concisely and in a way that doesn't necessarily convey any sort of, like, it represents a new sort of frontier. But that is entirely an orthographic convention. There is no equivalent to that in speech. That's aside from, like, poggers, but that's because that's just that's an outstretch of that same sort of,
Poggers. That's like when you I'm just trying to remember. Like, that's kind of funny. That it's like, if you think about it, like language, language is just like a way to convey. It's a conveyance. It's like communication, right? And I guess, all these like dumbass Twitch emotes that were just like literally just like saying well, at least at this point, post ironically or whatever.
Yeah, it's gotten to the point where I've stopped using it ironically and I've started using it genuinely, and I've stopped myself and been like, am I turning? Do I want to go down this path? And it'll eventually get to the point where it's like, I used to say yeet ironically, and now I use it as a verb, as if I'm just any other normal person, and it's like, that's very weird. Like, that went from pure irony, purely using it ironically, to, and that I mean, again, not to belabor the point that we somehow managed to keep rerunning the same circles, but
that's what makes it good, that we have like a common theme to go around.
Irony, and the use of irony tends to lead to, Poe's law is very much a guideline for life, because it does end up being that irony eclipses itself to become completely genuine if it is not in the right context. If you're using it ironically, you are usually 2 steps away from using it genuinely, which is why generally irony defenses don't work too well, because ironically liking something and ironically using something are literally just liking something with a veneer. It's a different paint job. It's the same thing. A turd can be painted red, but it's just a red turd.
You like it, but like in a different way, and you don't want to admit that you. It's like you don't want to admit that you like it in a way.
Well, exactly, and that's part of it. Is like, it's difficult to. It's difficult to penetrate that sort of that difference between, like, when people are being genuinely ironic and trying to, like, I think the difference between genuine irony and the irony of genuineness, I guess I'll call it, as the two paradoxes, or the two separate categories, is that, like, genuine irony knows when to stop, and the irony of genuineness does not. The irony of genuineness is when you continue to use it over and over again, and eventually it becomes normalized. The genuine irony is when you use something as a rhetorical device, and then you stop using it because the point is ended, and unless that point comes up again, you stop, because it's just not point. There's no point in it. If it's not proving a point, it's not utilitarian.
that makes a lot of sense because I just thought about it because the irony of Dave Chappelle being a crackhead or whatever. I don't know. You have like these comedic situations or whatever. You have like irony used. You have one point or one joke, maybe that be used a little bit or a lot, but you have one point. But with language, like with Pog, you don't have like an end point or one point you're trying to make. Like, oh, it's just I'm using it ironically, and that's funny. But then it's like you keep using that joke, and like there's no end point to using it, right? So naturally, it become a part of your your like various like language words, your actual words, because there's like you use it so much that you use it like more than actual words you use otherwise, right? So
yeah, there's no point. It's like using something for genuine irony generally means that there's a point that you're making. Irony generally means that there's irony is the opposite of what you would expect someone to use, and usually it is used in a way that makes some sort of sense. Like, if you use something in a way that is a parody is a form of irony, where it sort of it evokes an opposite response than the norm in order to draw attention to the fact that something is strange about the situation. It uses irony to draw a point, to belabor a conclusion. The irony of genuineness is where you have someone just using something for the point of using it, and then when asked why they're using it, they say irony. And irony is used as an excuse rather than as a explanation. It stands on its own rather than being inferred. Irony is generally self-apparent. Irony is generally a self-apparent phenomenon unless it is being used in vain, where if you have to explain that it's irony, you were doing it completely wrong.
It should be like with exaggeration, basically.
Essentially, it's very weird, and this is something that I think a lot of young kids really struggle to figure out. It's like when they say they're ironic, they're doing it because they don't want to be seen as like they want to draw attention to the fact that they have that they're detached. There's a level of coolness in being detached from something, but being detached from it is completely they don't realize that the veneer is really paper thin, and that people can see through the fact that irony is really just a piss poor defense for what is in reality just genuine usage without really any. And that comes back to using slurs as ironically, and using making edgy points ironically, because there's just this sort of you can make edgy points and make I think this factors back to the thing we were talking about with Rush Hour. Like, you can be edgy, you can do edgy comedy and still have a point, and still have like a greater lesson. Like, Dave Chappelle, I think Dave Chappelle said some really, really catastrophically dumb things. Catastrophically dumb things, but he also makes some great points, all the while making horrific missteps. I don't think it's mutually exclusive. I don't think anyone's mutually exclusive to that. People can make great points and still be awful people. Not that Dave Chappelle is really an awful person insofar as he puts his foot in his mouth so many times that he's just. I don't know what he's doing. I don't know if he genuinely harbors bad opinions, or if he's just really trying to be edgy.
He's just putting his.
He's being a troll, and he always has been. But he said, one famous quote from him, and I will obviously paraphrase this, but he said, he was the F slur. He was talking about why he couldn't use it, and obviously he can't use it. But at the same time, he was saying, what reason can I do that, but I can use the N slur? And she's like, well, because you're not gay. And his response was, well, I'm not the N slur either. Which is like, it's one of those quotes where you're like, I don't agree with your methodology, but you're not wrong. Like, that is a very interesting point. And that's being edgy for the point of making a point. It doesn't even have to be the correct point. It can still be wrong. It can still not make sense. But at the very least, it's like, you can give it the benefit of the doubt that it's not edgy for the point of being edgy. It's the point of, like, he's making an actual point. And admittedly, I don't agree with what he said. I don't agree with anything that I don't see it as. I don't see it nearly as the same way that he put it. I think he made some interesting points. I don't have enough. I I don't personally have enough experience with certain issues as a person. You know, I'm white. I don't experience racism. I don't have that experience to draw upon. So as a result, it's like I can't really talk about racial issues from anything other than an uninformed perspective. But at the same time, I still, as a knee-jerk reaction, fundamentally disagree with some of his assertions, even if I see where he's coming from. But that's okay. Like, I don't think
that opens up discussion at least, you know?
Right. And it isn't meant to be like, some of it was meant to be like the most foot and mouth moments were the purposeful, like, and there's very few of those, but the purposeful foot and mouth moments are the moments when someone goes from making a point to just punching down, essentially.
Being crass.
Is what they call it. You know, when you punch down as a comedian, you fundamentally deprive your audience of the ability to relate to the comedy, and it just becomes hate. It just becomes hateful. It's not funny. It's not interesting. It's edged with a point of edge, and it makes some people laugh because some people like the schadenfreude of having people be punched down that they don't like. And this is the way that it kind of works, is that there's always sort of it's always about the other and about alienating the other. But I do think that it's still, you know, you have to. I do believe that the world has to have discussions even with people who don't necessarily believe the same thing you do, insofar as they're not advocating for literal genocide or the elimination of these categories. If they have troubles understanding it, or if they have concerns about the way that certain things goes, then you have to have those discussions. You can't shut them out, because that's how you get extremism. You get extremism by letting people sort of just roost in their own misconceptions, and as a result, they get calcified in it. You know, it's the same thing. There are plenty of people with very good intentions who need to be talked down from the ledge of being completely and utterly over the line. Like, there are plenty of people who do things in, you know, Greenpeace is a great example of that, where it's like you're saving the planet, but you're also destroying, you know, you're walking on the Nazca lines because you want to advertise Greenpeace. It's just like, yo, wait a minute. The earth is important, but it's also extremely important to not be complete, like, that is the whitest, like, that is the whitest form of environmentalism I've ever seen, which is fuck your culture. We want to make sure that we can advertise Greenpeace on the Nazca lines. Where it's like, I get it, you're trying your best, but what the hell? Again, where's your PR firm? Who thought of this? Why? This was only, and this is at the point where you wonder to what degree it's sort of like suicide marketing, where it's like, to what degree they,
or else, you know?
To what degree it's like, does, you know, there's the old saying that no exposure is bad exposure. You know, there's no such thing as bad exposure. You can have an influence on things by being a negative role model, and to some degree, I wonder to what a guerrilla marketing tactic is purposefully bombing your own PR campaign and then seeing exactly how much discussion it generates. Because, like, for the amount of people who, for example, with the National Dex thing, for the amount of people who said, I will never buy another Pokemon game again because you bastards are removing this, there were plenty of other people who said, you are entitled, and I am going to buy this specifically to irk you. I'm going to get this fucker's sales numbers up just to make you mad. Genius. Controversy sells because it tribalizes, and tribalism is very, very good at selling product.
That's like, oh man, that's like basically like most of our issues as humans, as in this like 21st century, are like going back to the roots of, like, well, I mean, that's every issue if you think about it, but like like now we're like especially noticing that like these are like way like back human, like we're noticing that right now. We're noticing you can have a conversation about the otherness of like people who are like ostracized or whatever, but you would, like, most people like in the 1920s wouldn't even notice notice that kind of thing, you know? And it's like, how do we stop ourselves? There's no really way to stop ourselves from being tribalist society, except like by axing these issues like one by one, right? You have to remember, like, yes, gay rights, trans rights. You have to, like, you know, like, you have to remember, like beat into your thought process. Like, yes, you have to remember these things, because it's so easy to fall back into those like old traps of like ostracizing people for just the sake of doing it, because it's just like how our minds work, I guess.
Because as a charitable respect to everything, we are tribalistic, and fundamentally there are underlying assumptions that we make that lead us to these conclusions of like, that is implicitly the other. And although it's really unfortunate that it's that way, it's still that way, because we, especially with problems with, like, for example, I try to be an ally with issues of race, knowing that I am completely uninformed, because I know that I am going to put my foot in my mouth if I try to do anything other than, mediate it from my perspective. If I try to assume a perspective that is not my own, I am going to completely fail, because it is a co-opting of a perspective that I do not have access to. I do not have the ability to draw on those experiences. And as a result, it's like I do have the implicit factors of being an other, and not having necessarily the same. So my perspective on it is constantly in this, it's obviously not the same as, like, it's not to the same degree, because we've had many, 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 many more years of continual struggle for civil rights. And the fact that the civil rights movement is obviously completely and utterly not dead, and still has we still have all of these different systemic problems. I can recognize that, and also recognize that I just don't have the experiences to draw on to be anything more than, like, I support those causes in the way that I can, knowing that I don't have those experiences and don't have the same, I extend my support within the realm of understanding my limitations. And within that, it does become a battle of, like, you have to remember consciously that it's like, my perspective here is obviously not necessarily on one-to-one. Like, any opinion that I have on this comes through the lens of not having any experiences to draw on about racism other than observed racism, right? So it's like, in that way, it's like my perspectives on that are not necessarily, I hesitate to say that they're unimportant, but rather that they shouldn't be the main focus, and that it's obvious that they should come with the asterisk saying that, hey, this is not necessarily valid. It's the same goes with any of the bigger debates like abortion. Like, as a biological man, like, that is not necessarily my position to dictate anything. Like, I understand that. And my personal position on it being pro-choice doesn't mean a goddamn thing, because insofar as I'm just, I will offer support to whoever I can. I will vote for any ballot measure that says that it's available because I believe in it. But that doesn't mean that my opinion necessarily lends itself to anything other than being a perspective from the other side, from a side that doesn't have any kind of bearing on what is actually happening. Yeah. Which I think is interesting, because that's really what we're seeing with ally culture, with LGBTQ issues, is that people who are straight and cis hetero, they are trying their best in some cases to do right by people, but in certain cases they slip up when they assume these experiences in certain ways that are not necessarily aligned with the issues that with the experiences that people have on these issues. So people try their best to be allies, and they end up co-opting the entire issue by being completely and utterly foot and mouthy about it.
Yeah, it's like the same thing. It's like you have the right idea, you have the right, you're let's see, you have a message that's like good. You have a positive message, but you don't know how to portray it well, I guess. Or your
heart's in the right place, but you're not doing it correctly.
Yeah, you're doing the wrong thing for the right reasons.
Right, and it's very sad, because it's very difficult to kind of have that discussion and be like, yo, listen, I appreciate what you're doing, but I also don't, because you need to stop and you need to think about what you've done.
Really
it's a very I think that's part of activism culture, though, is like that to some degree. It's like there's sort of it's the uncomfortable bigger question of activism culture, which is that to what degree, uh, to what degree are to what degree does ally culture create uh, a sort of a to what degree do people have this expectation that like their experience matters as much as people who are suffering, right?
Yeah.
Like just like that, it's a very weird conception, and it's something that needs to be tackled in the near future at the very least with theory and with other things. Like it should really be taught very early that it's like, listen, like you will have many times in your life when you have to stand up for somebody, but don't think for a moment that that necessarily means that you share in their struggle because you don't. You just need to be there when you can be. Like that is what is important. You need to do whatever you can personally without co-opting the struggle as a struggle for yourself, because that is not what it is about. It is about the people you are fighting for.
I think that well, actually, I think that's a good place we can because okay, so the thing I was thinking about, like, we're having this conversation, but in the back of my mind, I'm like, how do we? First of all, I'm thinking like the thoughts of. Let's just like go in the meta sense. We're going to talk about the podcast, right? Like this thing.
Analysis hour.
Yeah. Like, how does the podcast like affect the issue? You know, that's like, does it give more like what is like if we're talking about this stuff, like it's just like, we're shooting the shit, right? We're seeing each other's like points, but like in the grander sense, like, what does it do for like someone who's just like a random listener? It's like, are we gonna sway opinions or just open up minds or whatever? It's like,
I don't even think necessarily that's what has to happen. It contributes to a body of literature that says that people are talking about these issues, even if it doesn't sway anybody's opinions. We still had the conversation. We still talked about it. And in that way, we contribute to the greater, larger understanding that this is not some issue that just arose out of nowhere. This is an issue that people are thinking about. And that ever so slowly, public consciousness can come to embrace these issues as being more important as a result of its penetration into media. Like, I don't know. I don't see it in a grander purpose of being like, are two dudes really gonna are two dudes talking over Discord really gonna be able to sway people's opinions? I don't know. I don't think us shooting shit really actually has any bearing on anything other than like we say what we want to say, and we sort of examine these opinions. I think that it has a cultural effect in aggregate, which is that we join a chorus of voices who are saying the exact same thing, but and the normalization of these conversations rather than making them some awkward topic at dinner with your racist family members in Thanksgiving, right? Like it makes it something completely separate from that. It makes it like, we can have a casual conversation about this without yelling and fighting, or without seeing each other on
like thoughtful, like, back and forth about it,
Yeah, and we can make it multidiscipline. We can weave it, we can go anywhere from literally the Pokemon Company has managed to curdle some goodwill in the past few years to, racism, right? That's a hell of a jump, but it is also interesting. I think to a degree it contributes to just, if anything, it's an interesting listen.
I guess you're right, because it's like
don't want to blow my own horn.
There's really like no grander thing for every like conversation, but I guess like the best we can wish for is like to make one line or one thought about like any of these things last a little longer than the duration of our conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's like the general gist of it.
That's what it is. It's about public consciousness.
Yeah. So, I don't know how to end it. We're not. What are your last thoughts about this cyberpunk hellhole we live in? I think that's a good title. I think that's a good title.
I think that I echo the opinion of a lot of people that we're in a cyberpunk dystopia, but just without all the pretty neon lights and without all the Japanese mega corporations. Because honestly, the conglomeration has happened. It just happened in America instead.
Mm-hmm.
That's another issue, but it's interesting. We are definitely living out some of the fantasies people had in the 1980s, just without all the glow, without everything that made it seem attractive.
I guess at that point, then I guess if we just our brains don't accept that this is like amazing future. But when you think about it on the wider scale, then it's an amazing future. But as like we're just looking in there, it's like, no, this is just our life now.
The fact I don't drive a hermetically sealed car that drives itself yet, like the fact that there's still only one company producing cars like that, is the epitome of the disappointment that most people have.
Yeah.
That is the caramelization of their disappointment, is that there's no flying cars. It is not about the fact that there is a corporate hellscape. That is kind of a given. Like that has become the greatest. I think it almost harkens back to the greatest. What is it that they say? Like the greatest evil that the devil ever committed was normalizing sin, and likewise, the mundaneness of corporate overreach is the greatest sin that corporations have ever hoisted upon the masses. Is that we see it as normal and expected. We don't see it as like, this is really fucked up. We see it as, this is fucked up, but yeah, that's just the way it is, right? Like, it's a corporation. It's just going to happen. Like, it's just a ticking time bomb. At what point are they going to start valuing money over people? At what point are they going to put their foot in their mouth? At what point?
You're saying that like they don't already do,
Well, exactly. And it's like, especially with startup culture, it's like, we're just seeing the more and more creation of these companies, and it doesn't get any better. Uber was a great example of a company that came out of nowhere, successfully penetrated mainstream consciousness with completely illegal tactics, and then managed to be rotten to the absolute core, to the point where it was just an absolute hellhole to work in. And in that way, it's like, this is just, that is a quintessential story of corporate. That is the wolf. That is the modern Wolf of Wall Street. The Wolf of Wall Street was a story told in the 1980s and 90s. This is the modern Wolf of Wall Street, which is getting filthy rich and then being found out to be a complete and utter psychopath. Like,
good times.
Very good times. What are your last thoughts?
Well, firstly, Valhalla is a really good game. If you listen this far,
good game.
If you listen this far, you probably have the $15 to go and buy it. Just go and play it. Really.
If you listen this far, you'll love Valhalla.
You'll love.
If you like talking, you'll love Valhalla.
Yeah.
You're also probably drunk, so I mean, probably. Listen to you'll like the bartending features.
Oh yeah, I'm saying but yeah, that game basically covers all of like what I think. That's what everything I love about Cyberpunk. It's like every single like social issue. We've covered it through this entire thing, but every single social issue that could be thought of or whatever, and like a kind of not like in the novel form. Like you go and read fucking Blade Runner's like before book, what's it, prequel or whatever. Well, can androids think of electric sheep or whatever? It's like a different kind of yeah. It's like a different version of that kind of cyberpunk hellhole, but like that's the version that like there's a few pieces of media that like really like touch me in that way, and I didn't notice how much I missed. Like I knew like even when I finished playing, I was like, I know I'm gonna like think about this game nonstop like for the next like few years of my life. So that just like says everything. So that's really through all the conversation we had. I'm just gonna say that play that game, because if nothing else, it's a fun romp with some cool characters and makes you think about some stuff you might have not before. And just like that's made for me. That's why I'm so glad we started that off with the whole thing. That's where the conversation picked up from, because we can go on for like more hours on like how each like section does it. I want to make a video about that one day, but it'd be
interesting. It'd be interesting to do an analysis.
There should be like a really depthful analysis of that game. There's like a lot to work with there, but yeah. So yeah, reward a developer for like going through the effort and like making their heartfelt story in this this futuristic hellhole thing, and to see how it aligns with our actual the world we're living in right now. Even if you're in like a country that's like not even like too extremely advanced, it's like even like doing like whatever
You don't live in America. Congratulations, and also
good job.
Still play the game.
Good job. If you don't speak English, I don't know if they have a non-English version. I'm sorry, but
Well, they have at least a Japanese version, I believe, because yeah. Well, if they're Venezuelan,
then if they don't have
if they don't have like Spanish translations or similar, right? Like
they gotta have a Portuguese one at least.
Portuguese too. I don't know. They must have some.
They must. They have to. But yeah, just play that game. Second of all, just in general, first of all, trans rights. That's another thing.
Yes.
Just saying.
Trans rights.
That should be implied if you're on where am I uploading this? My channel probably. So if you're on my channel, then get the fuck out. If you first of all, if you made it this far and like, well, I'm not quite sure.
If you made it this far and that statement offends you, I'm sorry, but I'm not exactly sure. Like,
you wasting your time? Like, leave, go.
Pretty sure you got to hour 1 and you were like, nope.
But I really can't say any more because, like, your thoughts were like so concise and so thing just like so well spoken. I just like that's just like a different way of saying what you said, but it's like a back and forth.
No, I really appreciated hearing. I really appreciated hearing what you had to say. I thought it was super interesting. It's very interesting to talk about these topics and to be able to reflect on them in ways that you can only talk to yourself about them so much, and having someone to talk to it about is always pleasant.
Yeah, I think that's it's a very good place to end on. Just like the comfort of human conversation. I think
absolutely, it will be the only thing that will get us through this.
Yeah, that's like the human
conversation.
That's the experience, communication, conversation, just thoughts and ideas, the sharing of it. So absolutely. that's what the podcast is about. Human talk.
It's human talk.
Human talk podcast.
Yeah,
and that's a good place
to
all
end together.
So yeah. I guess we do your introduction, do your de-introduction, your exit.
My de-introduction.
Your unintroduction, yeah.
What is a good unintroduction? See y'all later. Take care.
Actually, now think about it, you didn't like say your name on the thing, did you?
Oh yeah, just record a separate feature, which is like just splice it together.
I was like considering how do I start this? Like,
I think it should just be a cold open, honestly, and maybe just if honestly you could just record like a separate thing where it's like it fades in from the cold open. Wait, did you get the recording?
We're gonna do the idea.
Did you get the recording of the first part?
I need to download that.
If you can download the first part where it just stops all of a sudden, we can use part of that as like a cold open, and then like just sort of fade into some sort of introduction, and then. Yeah, that's what we should do. We should do 15 minutes of opening conversation, then yeet the bot and use that footage as cold open.
That would be oh my god
every single time.
This is part of the podcast, by the way. We're talking about our ideas on the podcast on the podcast because
Well, I mean, maybe it'll be cut out. I don't know. Unless it's scuffed.
if the bot
we said goodbye. We said goodbye, and then we
said goodbye. You can say goodbye. You can say goodbye as many times as we want to. It's my fucking podcast, all right? You could say it 7 times.
Some people have already turned it off because they don't want to hear.
I'm saying if you stay this long, you're finishing. Okay, we can talk for. We can literally say nothing. You're like, what are you gonna do? We're gonna finish. Like,
the podcast is 10 minutes of dead silence as we try to figure out how the fuck to download the thing.
I just forget I'm glad I
forget to yeet the bot. Like
yeah. God, what if that just happens? Like, what if this get fucked up and like I upload like 10 minutes of silence? That's the cold open. 10 minutes of silence.
10 minutes of silence. I mean, to be fair, it'd just be sort of a, and then you just what would happen is you cut right into you cut in right into the start of the conversation, and then immediately go into like intro music. So it's like 10 minutes of silence. Then I think. Immediately goes into.
And this was fun. This was good. I don't know how to end.
Yeah,
it's fun.
Again,
I'm just gonna do it.
See you. All right. Take care.
Bye. Bye.